Have you ever felt impatient waiting for a text back? You know, that little bubble that seems to taunt you for minutes on end? Well, what if those minutes were weeks, or even months? Let's take a trip back in time, way back to an era before the instant world we know today. Welcome to the age before instant messages. Imagine this. It's the early 19th century. There are no phones, no internet, and not even a telegraph wire in sight. The world moves at the speed of a horse-drawn carriage or a sailing ship. Communication is a physical act, a tangible thing. If you wanted to tell your cousin in another state about your new baby, you couldn't just send a picture. You had to sit down, take out a quill and ink, and carefully write a letter. This wasn't just a quick note. Paper was precious. Postage was a real cost, and you knew your words would take a long time to arrive. So, you'd fill the pages. You'd describe the baby's first smile, the color of their eyes, the feeling of holding them. You'd ask about your cousin's family, their health, the harvest. You were essentially bottling up a piece of your life, sealing it with wax, and sending it on a journey. And what a journey it was. Your letter might travel by stagecoach, bumping along dusty, rutted roads. It could be handed from one rider to another, braving rain, snow, and the occasional highwayman. If it was going overseas, say from London to New York, it would be loaded onto a ship. For the next several weeks, your thoughts and feelings would be at the mercy of the vast, unpredictable Atlantic Ocean. Storms, pirates, simple bad luck, all of it could mean your message would never arrive. Think about the patience this required. You'd send your letter into the void, and then you'd wait and wait. You might not get a reply for 3, 4, maybe even 6 months. By the time you heard back, your baby might already be crawling. The world you described in your letter would have completely changed. This slow pace of communication shaped everything. Business deals took months to negotiate. A merchant in Boston might send an order for goods from China, and it would be a year or more before the ship returned with his cargo. He had to make decisions based on information that was hopelessly out of date, trusting his instincts and a whole lot of luck. And what about news? Today, we hear about events on the other side of the planet the second they happen. Back then, news traveled just as slowly as a personal letter. The Battle of New Orleans in 1815, a major American victory, was famously fought 2 weeks after the peace treaty was signed in Europe. The soldiers on the battlefield had no idea the war was already over. News of the treaty was still crossing the ocean on a slow-moving ship. Imagine being a parent with a son fighting in that war. You'd live in a constant state of uncertainty. Weeks and months would pass with no word. A letter might arrive, but it would be old news, describing a battle that happened long ago. You'd read it with a mix of relief and dread, knowing that in the time it took for the letter to reach you, anything could have happened. This created a different kind of emotional landscape. People lived with a constant, low-level hum of not. The world beyond your immediate town was a mysterious place. You relied on travelers' tailies, month-old newspapers, and letters from afar to piece together a picture of what was happening. Rumors and facts blended together. Was the news of a king's death true, or just gossip from a port city? You might not know for sure until the next ship arrived. This slowness wasn't all bad, though. It fostered a different kind of connection. A letter was an event. Its arrival was exciting. The whole family might gather round as it was opened and read aloud. People cherished these physical pieces of correspondence. They reread them, tied them in bundles with ribbon, and stored them in wooden boxers. These weren't just messages. They were artifacts, tangible links to loved ones far away. The act of writing itself was more deliberate. Knowing your words would be all your recipient had of you for months, you chose them carefully. You told stories. You shared your deepest thoughts. You crafted a narrative of your life. In a way, writing a letter was like keeping a shared diary with someone across the distance. This rhythm of life, dictated by the speed of sail and horse, is almost impossible for us to truly comprehend. We are a culture of now. We expect instant answers, instant updates, instant gratification. The idea of waiting 2 months to find out if your friend is okay after a big storm seems like a form of torture. But for our ancestors, it was simply reality. They built their lives, their relationships, and their societies around this slow flow of information. They cultivated patience, not because they were saints, but because they had no other choice. They learned to live with uncertainty and to cherish the connections they could make, no matter how long it took to forge them. So the next time you're staring at your phone, waiting for that reply, take a second. Think about that letter, sealed with wax, making its slow and perilous journey across the ocean. It's a powerful reminder of how dramatically our world has changed, and how the simple act of sending a message, something we do without a second thought, was once a monumental act of hope, patience, and connection. This was just the beginning, of course. The world was on the cusp of a revolution that would shatter this slow-paced reality forever. The invention that would change everything was just around the corner. The telegraph. Join us next time as we explore how a string of clicks and dashes began to shrink the globe and usher in the age of instant communication. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, be sure to subscribe for more. Imagine a world without instant messages, without phone calls, without even a letter arriving in less than a few weeks. That was the reality for most of human history. But in the 18th and early 19th centuries, something began to shift. A new dream started to spark in the minds of the most brilliant inventors and thinkers across Europe and America. The dream of instant connection. This wasn't just about sending messages faster. It was about conquering time and distance, weaving the world together in a way that had never been imagined. For centuries, the speed of communication was limited by the speed of a horse, a ship, or a runner. A message from London to New York could take weeks, even months, depending on the winds and the waves. News of great victories, terrible disasters, or the birth of a child would arrive long after the event had passed. The world felt vast, fragmented, and disconnected. But the Enlightenment had ignited a fire of curiosity and scientific inquiry. People were beginning to understand the mysterious forces of nature, particularly electricity. This strange, invisible power, once seen as little more than a parlor trick or a bolt from the sky, started to intrigue scientists. They saw its potential. Could this force, which seemed to travel instantaneously, be harnessed to carry thoughts and words across vast distances? Early pioneers, men like Francisco Salva, I Campillo in Spain, and Pavel Schilling in Russia, began conducting fascinating, albeit clumsy, experiments. Campillo proposed a system using 26 separate wires, one for each letter of the alphabet, using electrostatic charges to cause pith balls to move. Imagine the sheer complexity of that setup. It was impractical, sure, but it was a start. It proved that the concept, the core idea of sending signals through a wire, was not just fantasy. In Germany, the brilliant duo of Carl Friedrich Gauss and Wilhelm Weber developed an electromagnetic telegraph in the 1830s. Their device used a needle that would deflect left or right, corresponding to different letters and numbers. They successfully sent messages over a distance of about a kilometer, connecting their observatory to the Institute of Physics in Göttingen. This was a monumental leap forward. It demonstrated that a controlled, reliable signal could be sent and interpreted over a significant distance. The dream was slowly becoming a tangible reality. Simultaneously, across the Atlantic in America, a spirit of innovation and manifest destiny was fueling similar ambitions. Inventors and entrepreneurs were captivated by the challenge. They weren't just scientists in labs. They were practical dreamers who saw the immense commercial and social value of rapid communication. How could you run a railroad, manage a growing nation, or conduct business across a continent if it took weeks to send a simple instruction? The air was thick with ideas. Some were outlandish, like Tedia of sympathetic snails, a bizarre theory that snails, once paired, would remain psychically connected and could be used to transmit signals. While obviously unscientific, it shows just how desperate people were for a solution, how deeply the dream of instant connection had taken root in the popular imagination. This period was a chaotic and exciting race. Dozens of inventors were working on their own versions of a talking wire. Each discovery, each small success, built upon the last. News of Gauss and Weber's work in Germany would inspire an inventor in England. A published paper by one scientist would spark a new idea in another. It was a global, collaborative, and fiercely competitive effort, all driven by this shared audacious goal. They faced immense challenges, insulating the wires, generating a consistent power source, and creating a simple, easy-to-use code were just a few of the hurdles. Many attempts ended in failure, dismissed as the follies of eccentric dreamers. But these pioneers were relentless. They were driven by the conviction that they were on the cusp of something revolutionary, something that would fundamentally reshape society. The dream of instant connection was no longer confined to science fiction or fantasy. It had become the great scientific quest of the age. It was a puzzle that tantalized the greatest minds, promising not just fame and fortune to whoever solved it, but a chance to knit the entire world together, to erase the tyranny of distance, and to usher in a new era of human interaction. The stage was set, the players were in place, and the world was waiting, unknowingly, for the spark that would finally ignite the communications revolution. That spark was about to come from a most unexpected source, forever changing the way we live, work, and connect with one another. Thanks for watching. In our next chapter, we'll meet the artist-turned-inventor, who would finally crack the code and bring this incredible dream to life. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. Hello and welcome back to our series on the great inventors who shaped our world. In this chapter, we're re-diving into the life of a man you probably know for one thing: the telegraph. But Samuel Morse was so much more than just an inventor. Before he revolutionized communication, he was a celebrated artist, a painter of portraits and grand historical scenes. His journey from the art studio to the world of wires and code is a captivating story of passion, tragedy, and relentless determination. How did a man dedicated to capturing the world on canvas end up creating a system that would shrink it? Let's uncover the story of Samuel Morse, the artist who painted the future with dots and dashes. The year is 1825. Samuel Morse is in Washington, D.C., and he's at the peak of his artistic career. He has just received a prestigious commission to paint a portrait of the Marquis de Lafayette, the French hero of the American Revolution. This was a huge honor, the kind of project that could cement his legacy as one of America's great painters. He was in his element, mixing colors, studying his subject, and pouring his heart onto the canvas. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. He was respected, successful, and doing what he loved. But while he was away, basking in the glow of this career-defining moment, a tragedy was unfolding back home that would alter the course of his life forever. Back in New Haven, Connecticut, his wife Lucretia fell gravely ill. She passed away suddenly, but the news took days to reach Morse. A horse messenger delivered the letter from his father, but by the time Morse received it, his wife was not only gone, she had already been buried. His heart shattered, but it was too late. He had missed his chance to say goodbye. This devastating experience haunted him. He was consumed by grief and a single, burning question. In an age of steam trains and rapid industrial progress, why did information still travel so agonizingly slow? Why couldn't he have known sooner? The pain of that moment planted a seed in his deep personal need for a faster way to communicate over long distances. The artist's canvas suddenly seemed insufficient to express the urgency he felt. For the next few years, Morse continued to paint, traveling through Europe to study the old masters. Art was still his profession, but the problem of slow communication never left him. The turning point came in 1832. During his voyage home from Europe on a ship called the Sali, on board, he overheard a conversation among a group of scientists about the newly discovered electromagnet. One of the men, Dr. Charles Thomas Jackson, described how electricity could be sent instantly through any length of wire. Morse was captivated. He reportedly interrupted, asking if the presence of electricity can be made visible in any part of the circuit. I see no reason why intelligence may not be transmitted instantaneously by electricity. The other passengers were intrigued by his enthusiasm, but for Morse, this wasn't just a fascinating dinner table topic. It was a revelation. It was the solution he had been subconsciously searching for since his wife's death. That night, Morse couldn't sleep. He stayed up on deck, sketching feverishly in his notebook. He wasn't drawing landscapes or planning a new painting. He was designing a system of signals, a code of dots and dashes that could represent letters and numbers. He was envisioning a machine that could send these signals down a wire using electrical pulses. The idea for the telegraph was born right there, on the high seas, in the mind of an artist who was suddenly possessed by a scientific vision. Et la terre side, the crude methods of the old telegraphs were then disclosed, and the question was asked if the electricity could not be used. By the time the ship docked in New York, Samuel Morse, the painter, had disembarked as Samuel Morse, the inventor. He knew what he had to do. His life had a new, singular purpose. But having an idea is one thing. Bringing it to life is another entirely. Morse returned to a life of financial struggle. He was a professor of painting and sculpture at New York University, but his salary was meager. He poured every spare dollar and every moment of his time into his new obsession. His studio, once filled with canvases and easels, was now cluttered with batteries, magnets, and coils of wire. He lived a sparse existence, sometimes going without food, all to fund his experiments. Many of his friends and colleagues thought he had lost his mind. Why would a successful artist abandon his craft for such a wild, seemingly impossible scheme? They saw a man chasing a fantasy, but Morse saw a future where no one would have to suffer the agonizing wait for news that he had endured. His personal pain was the fuel for his scientific fire. Morse wasn't a trained scientist or engineer, and he needed help. He found a brilliant partner in Leonard Gale, a chemistry professor at the university. Gale helped Morse improve his battery power and build more powerful electromagnets, allowing his signals to travel over much longer distances than his early prototypes. Then came Alfred Vail, a skilled young mechanic whose father owned a successful ironworks. Vail was captivated by Morse's demonstration and convinced his father to invest in the project. Vail wasn't just a financial backer. He was a crucial, technical collaborator. He refined Morse's initial clunky designs, creating a more practical and efficient sending and receiving apparatus. It's often said that while Morse had the grand vision, it was Vail who hammered out the practical details and perfected the mechanics. Together, this small, dedicated team worked tirelessly, often in secret, to turn Morse's dream into a functioning reality. The code itself was a work of genius. Morse, with Vail's assistance, studied the frequency of letters in the English language. They assigned the simplest codes a single dot for E and a single dash for T to the most commonly used letters. More complex combinations of dots and dashes were given to less frequent letters like Q and Z. This made the system incredibly efficient. It wasn't just about sending a signal. It was about sending information as quickly and clearly as possible. It was a language designed for electricity. This artist, who had spent his life thinking about composition and form in painting, was now applying a similar sense of elegant design to a system of communication. He was, in a way, still an artist, but his new medium was electromagnetism, and his new alphabet was the Morse code. After years of struggle and refinement, the moment of truth arrived. Morse needed to convince a skeptical world, and more importantly, the U.S. Congress, that his invention was worth investing in. He performed countless demonstrations, often too small, unimpressed crowds. The breakthrough came in 1843. After years of lobbying and near-failure, Morse finally secured $30,000 from Congress to build an experimental telegraph line. The line would stretch 40 miles, from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland. This was his one shot to prove that his invention wasn't just a laboratory curiosity, but a revolutionary tool that could change the world. The pressure was immense. The construction of the line was fraught with challenges, but on May 24, 1844, everything was ready. Gathered in the Supreme Court's chamber in Washington, Morse sat at his transmitter. In Baltimore, Alfred Vail waited at the receiver. The audience was a mix of supporters, skeptics, and government officials. Morse chose the first official message. It wasn't a technical phrase or a simple greeting. He chose a line from the Bible, suggested by a young woman named Annie Ellsworth. "What hath God wrought?" He tapped out the message, dot by dot, dash by dash. The clicks of the telegraph key were the only sound in the silent, tense room. 40 miles away, Vail received the message instantly and telegraphed it back to Washington for confirmation. It had worked perfectly. Information had just traveled faster than any horse, train, or ship in human history. It was instantaneous. The The world had just entered a new era of communication, all thanks to the vision of an artist who refused to let go of an idea born from heartbreak. Samuel Morse's journey from artist to inventor is a powerful reminder that innovation doesn't always come from predictable places. It wasn't a scientist or an engineer who conceived of the telegraph, but a painter driven by a deep human need. His artistic sensibility, his eye for design, his search for elegant solutions was not abandoned, but he painted a new world, not with pigments on canvas, but with electrical pulses on a wire. His story shows us that sometimes the greatest breakthroughs happen at the intersection of different disciplines, when a creative mind from one field applies its unique perspective to the challenges of another. Samuel Morse didn't just invent a machine. He composed a new language for humanity and, in doing so, changed the very fabric of society. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I did, please give this video a like and subscribe to our channel for more chapters on the inventors who shaped our history. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series. Today, we're diving into Chapter 4, a story of profound loss and the unexpected birth of an idea that would change the world forever. It's a powerful reminder that sometimes, from our darkest moments, the brightest sparks of innovation can emerge. This is the story of Samuel Morse, a man driven by tragedy to conquer the tyranny of distance. Before he was the father of the telegraph, Samuel Morse was a celebrated painter. His art was his life, his passion. In the winter of 1825, he was at the peak of his career, commissioned to paint a portrait of the Marquis de Lafayette in Washington, D.C. This was a huge honor, a project that any artist of his time would have dreamed of. He was hundreds of miles away from his home in New Haven, Connecticut, completely engrossed in his work, pouring his soul onto the canvas. Back home, his beloved wife, Lucretia, was expecting their third child. He was a family man, deeply in love, but his work often took him far from them. One day, while he was meticulously working on Lafayette's portrait, a horse messenger arrived, breathless and exhausted. He handed Morse a letter. It was from his father. The letter delivered a devastating blow with just a few stark words. His wife, Lucretia, had fallen gravely ill. Morse's world stopped. He immediately packed his brushes, abandoned the prestigious commission, and began the frantic journey home. The trip was grueling. He traveled by horse and stagecoach, a journey that in the 1820s took days. Every bump in the road, every slow-moving mile, was agony. His mind was a whirlwind of hope and fear, praying that he would make it in time, but he didn't. By the time Samuel Morse finally arrived in New Haven, days had passed since he received that first letter. He was met not with his wife's loving embrace, but with the chilling silence of a home in mourning. Lucretia was not only gone, she had already been buried. The news of her death had traveled faster than he could, but even that news was tragically slow. He had missed his chance to say goodbye, to hold her hand one last time. He had been completely unaware of the severity of her illness, of her passing, of her funeral, all because the message had taken so long to reach him. The grief was immense, a crushing weight that threatened to shatter him. But mixed with that sorrow was a burning, white-hot frustration, a rage against the slowness of the world. Why did it take so long? Why, in an age of growing progress, were we still bound by the speed of a horse? He could paint a person's likeness in stunning detail, but he couldn't receive a message in time to be with his dying wife. The injustice of it all consumed him. This personal tragedy became the seed of a monumental obsession. He was no longer just Samuel Morse, the artist. He was now Samuel Morse, the man who would wage war against time and distance. In the depths of his sorrow, Morse's focus shifted dramatically. He continued to paint for a while, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. The vibrant colors on his palette seemed dull compared to the fire that now burned within him. He began to think, to wonder, to dream. There had to be a better way, a faster way, a way for a husband in Washington to know, almost instantly, that his wife in New Haven needed him. His artistic mind, once focused on capturing light and shadow on canvas, now turned to capturing something far more elusive: electricity. At the time, the concept of electricity was still something of a parlor trick for many, a scientific curiosity. People like Benjamin Franklin had flown kites in thunderstorms, but its practical application was limited. Morse, however, saw something more. He began to read everything he could find about electricity and magnetism. He spoke with scientists and inventors, absorbing their knowledge, his mind piecing together disparate ideas. He learned about the work of Ampere and other European scientists who were experimenting with electromagnetism. The idea began to form. If electricity could be sent down a wire, couldn't it carry a message? This wasn't a simple pivot in his career. It was a complete transformation fueled by heartbreak. He traded his artist's smock for the cluttered workbench of an inventor. His friends and colleagues were baffled. Why would a successful and respected painter throw away his career to chase a seemingly impossible dream? They saw it as madness, a foolish obsession. But they didn't understand the depth of his pain, the profound personal motivation driving him forward. For Morse, this wasn't about fame or fortune. It was about ensuring that no one else would ever have to feel the helpless agony he had endured. The path was far from easy. Morse was an artist, not a scientist or an engineer. He faced years of trial and error, of ridicule and financial hardship. He poured all his money, and the money of his supportive brothers, into his experiments. He built crude prototypes in his New York University studio, wires strung across the room, strange clicking devices cluttering his tables. There were countless moments of failure, moments when the challenges seemed insurmountable. Many times, he was on the brink of giving up, of admitting that his critics were right. But then, he would remember. He would remember the long, desperate ride home. He would remember the closed door, the silent house. He would remember Lucretia. And that memory, that painful, gut-wrenching memory, would reignite his determination. His personal tragedy was not just the spark. It was the fuel that kept the fire of innovation burning through the darkest and most difficult years. He envisioned a system of clicks and silences, a language of electrical pulses that could travel across the country in the blink of an eye. This system would eventually become Morse code, the language of the telegraph. So when we look at the invention of the telegraph, it's easy to see it as just a technological marvel, a product of scientific progress. But it's so much more than that. It's a monument to a love that was cut short. It is a testament to how one man's deepest pain can be transformed into a gift for all of humanity. Samuel Morse didn't just invent a machine. He conquered the silence and the distance that had broken his heart, weaving a network of wires that would tie the world together in a way no one had ever imagined. His tragedy became our connection. Thank you so much for joining me for this chapter. It's a powerful story, and it really sets the stage for the incredible journey of invention that follows. If this story moved you, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next chapter in our series. We'll explore the technical challenges and the eventual triumph of Morse's incredible invention. Thanks for watching. Welcome back to our journey through the history of communication. Today, in Chapter 6, we're diving into the electrifying world of the science of sparks. Before Samuel Morse could tap out his first message, a scientific revolution had to happen. The story of the telegraph isn't just about a clever code. It's about harnessing one of nature's most mysterious forces. Electricity. For centuries, electricity was little more than a parlor trick. People would rub amber to pick up feathers or generate static shocks for amusement. It was a curiosity, a phenomenon without a real purpose. Think about it. We knew about lightning. We knew about static. But connecting these dots into something useful, that was a giant leap that humanity wasn't yet ready to take. This all began to change in the early 19th century, when a few brilliant minds started to notice that electricity and another invisible force, magnetism, were strangely, intimately connected. The stage was set for a discovery that would shrink the world. Our story's first hero is a Danish scientist named Hans Christian Røed. In 1820, Røed was giving a lecture, and like many professors of his time, he used demonstrations to keep his students engaged. On his table, he had a wire connected to a battery, and nearby, a simple magnetic compass. By pure chance, during the lecture, he happened to place the wire, carrying an electric current directly over the compass. And then, something magical happened. The compass needle, which always points north, suddenly twitched and swung to the side, trying to align itself with the wire. Can you imagine the shock in that room? For the first time, Someone had witnessed a direct link between electricity and magnetism. When the current was on, the needle moved. When the current was off, it went back to pointing north. Rosted had stumbled upon a fundamental principle of the universe. An electric current creates a magnetic field. It wasn't just a fluke. He repeated the experiment over and over, confirming his findings. This wasn't just a new trick. It was the key that unlocked the door to a new era. The news of Arsted's discovery spread like wildfire across the scientific community in Europe, sparking a flurry of new experiments. The invisible force was finally starting to reveal its secrets. One of the first to hear this news was a brilliant French physicist named André Merriam. He was so inspired by Arsted's work that within just 1 week, he had not only replicated the experiment, but had also taken it several steps further. Ampere was a mathematical genius, and he wasn't content with just observing the effect. He wanted to understand it, to quantify. Italiano. He began to explore the relationship in detail. He discovered that two parallel wires carrying currents would either attract or repel each other, depending on whether the currents were flowing in the same or opposite directions. This showed that the magnetic force wasn't just acting on a compass. It was a fundamental interaction between moving electric charges. Ampere went on to formulate the mathematical laws that describe these magnetic forces, which are now fundamental to physics and engineering. We even named the unit of electric current, the ampere, or amp, after him. But his most crucial contribution to our story was the invention of the solenoid. Ampere found that by coiling a wire into a helix, he could dramatically concentrate the magnetic field on the inside. When current flowed through the coil, it acted just like a bar magnet, with a north and a south pole. This device, the solenoid, was the very first electromagnet. You could turn the magnetism on and off just by flipping a switch. This was the breakthrough. Now, humans had a way to create a controllable magnetic force at a distance. The theoretical groundwork for the telegraph was now laid. With the electromagnet in hand, the race was on. Scientists and inventors across Europe and America started tinkering. They realized that if you could use an electric current to create a magnetic force, hundreds of miles away you could use that force to do something, to make a sound, to move a needle, to leave a mark. Early attempts were often complex and impractical. Some involved bubbling gases in vials of acid. Others used a whole mess of wires to point to different letters. They worked, sort of, but they weren't scalable or reliable. What was needed was a simple, robust system. This is where the American artist and inventor, Samuel Morse, enters the picture. In 1832, while sailing home from Europe, he overheard a conversation about these new electromagnets. The idea struck him like a bolt of lightning. What if you could use an electromagnet to move a pen and make marks on a strip of paper? A short pulse of current could make a dot, and a longer pulse could make a dash. With just dots and dashes, you could create a code for the entire alphabet. The concept was beautifully simple. A single wire could carry complex information over vast distances, instantly. Morse wasn't a scientist like Rosted or Ampere. He was a painter. But he possessed a visionary's mind and a relentless determination. He spent the next several years working in near poverty, trying to turn his idea into a working device. He teamed up with partners like Leonard Gale, who knew the science, and Alfred Vail, a skilled mechanic who helped refine the hardware, particularly the crucial key for sending signals and the register for recording them. It was this combination of a simple, brilliant concept and practical engineering that finally cracked the code. Arsted's discovery of the link between electricity and magnetism was the spark. Ampere's work fanned that spark into a flame by creating the controllable electromagnet. And Morse, the visionary artist, used that flame to light up the world with a new form of communication. The telegraph was not the invention of a single person, but the culmination of a scientific journey, a beautiful example of how pure scientific curiosity can lead to world-changing technology. The science of sparks had finally found its voice, a voice that would soon click and clatter its way across continents and oceans. Thanks for watching. We've just seen how the basic science paved the way for a communication revolution. Join us next time as we explore the dramatic story of how Morse and his team battled to build the first telegraph line and sent that famous first message. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the science behind the story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Say you then. Have you ever had a brilliant idea, a real game changer, but lacked the resources to bring it to life? It's a frustrating spot to be in, and it's exactly where Samuel Morse found himself in the late 1830 segundos. He had this incredible concept for a telegraph, a device that could send messages across vast distances in an instant. But his prototype was, to be blunt, a bit clunky. It was a messy contraption of wooden frames, old clock parts, and wires. He knew it could work. He could see the future it promised, but he was stuck. He was an artist, not a mechanic, and he was running out of money. This is where our story takes a pivotal turn. It's a classic tale of being in the right place at the right time with the right person. In September 1837, Morse was giving a demonstration of his crude telegraph at New York University, where he was a professor. In the audience was a young, sharp, and mechanically gifted student named Alfred Vail. Vail wasn't just any student. His father, Stephen Vail, owned the Speedwell Iron Works in Morristown, New Jersey, one of the most advanced iron foundries in the country. Alfred had grown up around machinery, tools, and innovation. He had a practical mind and skilled hands, the perfect complement to Morse's visionary genius. As Vail watched Morse's demonstration, something clicked. He saw past the clumsy wooden frame and the sputtering sparks. He saw the sheer, world-changing potential of the idea. While others might have scoffed at the crude device, Vail saw the future. He approached Morse after the demonstration, his mind buzzing with ideas. He wasn't just impressed, he was inspired. This meeting was the spark that ignited the telegraph revolution. Vail saw what the invention needed. Not just a concept, but practical engineering, refined mechanics, and robust construction. And he knew just the place to make it happen. His father's ironworks. Vail made Morse a proposition that would change both their lives forever. He offered to refine the telegraph's design, build a superior prototype, and, crucially, secure the funding for the project hull in exchange for a share in the patent rights. For Morse, who was on the verge of giving up, this was a lifeline. He had found his missing piece. It was a handshake that would connect the world. So, the partnership was formed? Morse, the visionary artist, with a grand idea, and Vail, the practical engineer with the skills and resources to build it. They agreed that Vail would receive a 1/4 interest in the patent. With the deal sealed, Vail went to work at the Speedwell Iron Works. This wasn't just a side project for Vail. He poured his heart and soul into it. He moved the entire operation to a workshop at Speedwell, where he had access to top-notch tools, materials, and skilled craftsmen. He began to deconstruct Morse's original design, analyzing every component to see how it could be improved. One of the first things Vail tackled was the unwieldy recording mechanism. Morse's original idea was to have a pendulum-like stylus swing back and forth, marking a zigzag line on a moving strip of paper. It worked, but it was inefficient and the results were hard to decipher. Vail's genius was in simplification and improvement. He experimented tirelessly, and it is during this period that some of the telegraph's most iconic features were born. He developed a much more compact and efficient system. Instead of the clumsy pendulum, he created a vertical, spring-loaded lever that would make a distinct mark on the paper tape when an electrical current was received. This was a massive leap forward in reliability and clarity. And what about the code itself? This is where history gets a little fuzzy and has been the subject of much debate. We all know about Morse code, the system of dots and dashes. Samuel Morse had developed an early version of a code, but it was complex. It involved assigning numbers to words, and the sender would have to look up the numbers in a massive code book before transmitting. It was slow and incredibly impractical. Many historians credit Alfred Vail with developing the simpler, more elegant system of dots and dashes we know today. The story goes that Vail, ever the pragmatist, visited a local printing press to see which letters were used most frequently in the English language. He then ingeniously assigned the shortest codes, like a single .4e and a single .4t, to the most common letters. This made transmission dramatically faster and more intuitive. While Morse always maintained he was the sole inventor of the code, Vail's contributions to its practical, streamlined form are undeniable. This code was the very language of the new electric age. While Vail was working his mechanical magic in the workshop, Morse took on a different, but equally important, role. He became the public face of the invention, the tireless promoter, and the political lobbyist. He knew that for the Telegraph to succeed, they needed more than just a working machine. They needed government support and public belief. Morse spent months in Washington, D.C., navigating the frustrating maze of bureaucracy. He demonstrated the Telegraph to skeptical politicians and businessmen, trying to convince them to fund a grand experiment, an actual telegraph line. He faced constant rejection and ridicule. People called him a crank, a dreamer. They couldn't grasp how a message could travel through a wire. But Morse, fueled by the progress Vail was making back at Speedwell, persisted. Finally, in 1838, the new and improved telegraph was ready for its first major public demonstration. The stage was set at the Speedwell Iron Works. On January 6th, they strung 2 miles of wire around the workshop. Alfred Vail was at the transmitter. His father, Stephen Vail, handed him a message. The tension was palpable. This was the moment of truth. Vail tapped out the message using the new code and the refined key. At the other end of the wire, the receiver clicked to life, embossing a series of dots and dashes onto a paper strip. The message read, "A patient waiter is no loser." It was a perfect, triumphant success. The phrase was not only a testament to their years of hard work and perseverance, but also a prophetic statement about the future of their invention. The demonstration was a sensation. Word began to spread about the miracle machine built in Morse. This success gave Morse the credibility he desperately needed. Armed with this proof, he went back to Washington with renewed vigor. He continued to lobby Congress, performing demonstration after demonstration. He, Valet, and their partners faced more years of struggle, financial hardship, and political roadblocks. But they never gave up. The partnership between Morse and Vail is a perfect example of how innovation rarely happens in a vacuum. It often requires a team, a fusion of different talents. Morse had the vision, the big picture idea that could change the world. But it was Alfred Vail who had the practical skills, the engineering know-how, and the access to resources that turned that vision into a tangible, working reality. Without Vail's mechanical genius, Morse's telegraph might have remained a curious but impractical contraption in a university lab. Without Morse's relentless promotion and vision, Vail's brilliant engineering might never have found a purpose beyond the walls of the ironworks. Together, they were an unstoppable force. They were the yin and yang of invention, the dreamer and the doer. Their collaboration wasn't just a key partnership. It was the very engine that powered the telegraph from a flicker of an idea into a world-spanning network that would forever change human communication. In our next chapter, we'll see how this partnership finally secured the funding they needed from Congress to build the first ever public telegraph line, leading to that historic moment and the famous message, "What hath God wrought?" Thanks for watching. If you're enjoying this journey into the history of innovation, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter in our story. See you next time. Welcome back to our series on the history of communication. Today, in Chapter 8, we're rolling up our sleeves and heading into the workshop. We're going back to the 1830s, to a humble ironworks in Morristown, New Jersey. This isn't a story of massive factories or corporate funding. It's a story of ingenuity, resourcefulness, and a little bit of good, old-fashioned grit. Our main characters, Samuel Morse, the determined artist-turned-inventor, and his brilliant partners, Alfred Vail and Leonard Gale. Their mission was audacious: to build a machine that could send messages across vast distances using only electricity. Think about that. For a moment. In an era lit by gas lamps and powered by steam, the idea of harnessing invisible electrical pulses was pure science fiction to most. But for Morse and his team, it was a tangible dream, and they were ready to build it with their own hands. So, what did this first telegraph machine look like? It wasn't the sleek, brass key you might imagine from a Hollywood movie. Not yet. The first prototype was a wonderfully crude and beautiful creation, assembled from materials they had on hand. The base was a simple wooden canvas stretcher, the kind a painter like Morse would be very familiar with. This wasn't a coincidence. It was a testament to using what you know. On this wooden frame, they mounted the core components. First, the electromagnet. This was the heart of the machine. They meticulously wound coils of copper wire, insulated with cotton thread, around a soft iron core. When an electric current passed through these coils, the iron became a magnet, capable of attracting another piece of metal. This simple principle was the key to everything. Next came the armature, a small, movable bar of iron attached to a lever. This lever held a stylus, a pointed metal pin. When the electromagnet was activated by an incoming electrical signal, it would pull the armature towards it. This movement would cause the stylus on the other end of the lever to press down onto a moving strip of paper. No signal. A spring would pull the armature back to its resting position. It was a binary system of on and off, pull and release. But how did they create the signal in the first place? The sending device, or the transmitter, was equally ingenious. Initially, it wasn't a simple key. It was a complex device called a port. This was a system of cast metal slugs, each with a unique pattern of teeth, representing different letters and numbers. An operator would feed these slugs into the transmitter. As a lever traced the jagged teeth, it would open and close an electrical circuit, sending long and short pulses of electricity down the wire, the dots and dashes of what would become Morse code. And let's not forget the power source. There were no wall outlets in the 1830s. Their power came from voltaic piles, the earliest form of batteries. These were stacks of zinc and copper discs, separated by brine-soaked cloth. They were messy, unreliable, and required constant maintenance, but they produced the vital electric current that brought the entire system to life. Imagine the scene: the smell of acid from the batteries, the hum of the electromagnet, the clatter of the port rule, and the rhythmic scratching of the stylus on paper. This wasn't a silent, digital process. It was a noisy, mechanical symphony of invention. One of the most critical breakthroughs came from Alfred Vail. While Morse conceived the idea, Vail was the master machinist who refined it. Legend has it that it was Vail who simplified the complex port rule system into the elegant, single-key transmitter we recognize today. He realized an operator could learn to manually tap out the codes much faster and more efficiently. Vail also refined the code itself, reportedly assigning the shortest codes, like a single dot for E and a dash for T, to the most frequently used letters in the English language. Their workshop was a laboratory of constant trial and error. They experimented with different wire thicknesses, different battery configurations, and different designs for the electromagnets. They needed to make the signals strong enough to travel over miles of wire. This is where Leonard Gale, a chemistry professor, played a crucial role. He suggested using more powerful electromagnets and increasing the number of battery cells to boost the voltage, overcoming the signal degradation that had plagued Morse's earlier attempts. In 1838, after countless hours of tinkering, adjusting, and rebuilding, they were ready for a public demonstration. In that New Jersey workshop, with a small group of onlookers, Alfred Vail sent a message across 2 miles of wire coiled around the room. The message was simple but profound. A patient waiter is no loser. The machine worked. The stylus dutifully marked the paper tape, translating the invisible electrical pulses back into a readable message. It was a monumental achievement, born not in a pristine laboratory, but in the gritty reality of a 19th century workshop. It was built from wood, wire, magnets, and an unwavering belief in a radical idea. This first machine was the physical embodiment of a dream, the first concrete step toward a world where distance was no longer a barrier to communication. It proved that a message could, in fact, travel at the speed of light. This handmade contraption, built with passion and perseverance, would change the world forever. It was the ancestor of the telephone, the radio, the internet, and the device you're watching this on right now. All of it started here, with a wooden frame, a coil of wire, and a few brilliant minds who dared to build the future. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the birth of the telegraph. If you enjoyed this journey into the workshop of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you do unmiss the next chapter in our series. We'll see you next time. Have you ever sent a text message? Of course you have. But what if I told you the granddaddy of every single text, email, and DM you've ever sent wasn't digital at all? It was a language of simple dots and dashes, a rhythm tapped out across wires, changing the world forever. This is the story of Morse code. Our journey begins not with a flash of genius, but with a moment of profound personal tragedy. It's 1825, and a man named Samuel F.B. Morse is a successful portrait painter. He's in Washington, D.C., working on a prestigious commission when a horse messenger arrives with a letter. It's from his father. His wife, Lucretia, is gravely ill. Morse immediately packs up and races home to New Haven, Connecticut. But by the time he arrives, it's too late. His beloved wife has not only passed away, she has already been buried. Morse is utterly devastated. But in his grief, a powerful, world-changing idea begins to form. He is haunted by the thought that if only he had received the news faster, he could have been by her side. The slowness of communication, the days and weeks it took for information to travel, was no longer just an inconvenience. For Morse, it was a source of deep personal pain. There had to be a better, faster way. This personal quest for rapid communication consumed him. Morse wasn't an engineer or a scientist by trade. He was an artist, but he possessed an insatiable curiosity and a relentless drive. The idea for an electric telegraph wasn't entirely new. Many others were experimenting with sending signals through wires. The problem was, their systems were incredibly complex, often requiring multiple wires for each letter of the alphabet. They were impractical, expensive, and couldn't cover long distances. Morse knew there had to be a simpler, more elegant solution. The breakthrough moment, the Eureka, that history remembers, happened aboard a ship in 1832. Morse was returning from a trip to Europe, where he had been studying art. During the long voyage, he fell into conversation with a fellow passenger who was demonstrating the principles of electromagnetism. He showed how electricity flowing through a wire could make an iron core magnetic, capable of attracting and repelling other metals. For Morse, it was like a lightning bolt. He saw it all in his mind's eye. An electrical current, a simple switch to interrupt it, and an electromagnet at the other end to receive the signal. He frantically scribbled in his sketchbook, sketching out a system of bumps on a moving tape, a physical representation of the electrical pulses. This was the seed of Morse code. Back in the United States, Morse dedicated himself to his invention. He wasn't a wealthy man, and he spent years in poverty, working in a small room at New York University, tinkering with magnets, wires, and batteries. His first prototypes were crude, built from an old picture frame, a clock's gearworks, and a pencil. It was a far cry from a sleek, modern device, but it worked. He could send a signal. The next challenge was creating the language itself. How do you translate the entire alphabet, numbers, and punctuation into just two simple signals, a short pulse and a long pulse, a dot and a dash? This is where the true genius of Morse's system shines. He didn't just assign codes randomly. Along with his brilliant assistant, Alfred Vail, he devised a system based on frequency. They reportedly visited a local print shop and counted the number of movable type letters in each bin. They reasoned that the most commonly used letters in the English language should have the shortest, simplest codes. So, the letter E, the most common letter, became a single dot. T, another frequent letter, became a single dash. Less common letters, like Q and Z, were given longer, more complex combinations. This was revolutionary. It made the code incredibly efficient to send and receive. An experienced telegraph operator could transmit messages with astonishing speed, their fingers dancing on the telegraph key, translating thoughts into a rhythmic stream of clicks. It was a language of pure information, stripped down to its most essential form. But inventing something is one thing. Convincing the world of its value is another. Morse and Vail faced skepticism and ridicule. Many people, including members of the U.S. Congress, dismissed their talking wire as a parlor trick or a fantasy. For years, Morse lobbied for funding to build a test line, a proof of concept to show the world what his invention could do. Finally, in 1843, after years of tireless effort, Congress narrowly approved $30,000 to build an experimental telegraph line. It would run 40 miles, from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, Maryland. It was an enormous undertaking, a race against time and public doubt. The team had to figure out how to insulate the wires, how to string them on poles across fields and forests, and how to build reliable relay stations to boost the signal over the distance. The day of the great experiment was May 24th, 1844. Samuel Morse sat in the Supreme Court chamber in the U.S. Capitol building. In Baltimore, Alfred Vail waited anxiously. The message chosen for this historic first transmission was a biblical quote suggested by a friend's daughter, Annie Els. It was a phrase filled with wonder and awe, perfectly capturing the magnitude of the moment. With a crowd of dignitaries and skeptics watching, Morse carefully tapped out the letters on his telegraph key. Dash. Across the 40 miles of wire, the electrical pulses traveled at nearly the speed of light. In Baltimore, Vail received the clicks and transcribed the message. He then tapped the same message back to Washington. A few moments later, the receiving instrument in the Capitol clicked to life. Morse translated the code. The words that appeared on the paper tape stunned the room into silence. "What hath God wrought?" It was a question that echoed across the globe. In that instant, the world shrank. For the first time in human history, complex information could be communicated almost instantaneously over long distances. The age of slow communication, the age that had caused Morse so much personal heartbreak, was over. The impact was immediate and profound. Telegraph lines spread like a web across continents and eventually under oceans. Newspapers could report on events from distant cities on the same day they happened. Businesses could coordinate operations across the country. Railroads used it to manage train schedules, making travel safer and more efficient. Families could stay connected, and governments could command armies. Morse code became the lifeblood of a new, interconnected world. It was the first true global network. For Samuel Morse, the artist who became an inventor out of grief, it was the culmination of a life's work. His simple, elegant language of dots and dashes had not only conquered distance, but it also laid the foundation for the entire digital age. Every time you send a message that zips across the world in a fraction of a second, you are living in the world that Morse's code helped to create. It all started with a simple rhythm, a universal language born from loss, but destined to connect us all. Thanks for watching. If you found this piece of history as fascinating as I do, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories about the inventions that shaped our world. See you next time.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the pioneers of technology. Today, we're diving into Chapter 10 of Samuel Morse's incredible journey, a chapter filled with skepticism, struggle, and moments where it all nearly came crashing down. We often remember Morse for his ultimate triumph, but the path to success was anything but smooth. It was a brutal, decade-long battle against public indifference, financial ruin, and the crushing weight of repeated failure. Imagine this. It's the late 1830s. Morse has a revolutionary idea, a way to send messages across vast distances almost instantly. He's poured his heart, soul, and what little money he has into developing his telegraph. He believes he holds the key to changing the world. The problem, almost no one else does. To the public, the idea of sending electricity down a wire to spell out words sounded like something out of a fantasy novel. It was magic, a trick, or worse, a complete scam. People were deeply skeptical. Newspapers and commentators of the day often mocked the concept, treating it as the fanciful dream of an artist playing at being a scientist. This widespread doubt wasn't just an attack on his pride. It had severe, real-world consequences. Without public support, there was no private investment. Businessmen and financiers, the very people whose capital Morse needed to build his first telegraph line, simply laughed him out of their offices. Why would they risk their money on such an outlandish scheme? As a result, Morse found himself in a constant state of financial hardship. There were times he was so poor he reportedly had to go days without a proper meal. He had given up his successful career as a painter, a stable source of income, to chase this dream. Now, with no money coming in and his savings completely depleted, he was on the brink of destitution. His letters from this period are heartbreaking. He wrote to friends and family, begging for small loans just to buy food or pay for the materials for his experiments. He was isolated, living in a small, sparse room in New York, often working by candlelight late into the night, fueled by little more than sheer determination. The dream of the telegraph was costing him everything. To break through this wall of skepticism, Morse knew he had to prove his invention worked. He needed a successful public demonstration. He arranged several attempts to showcase the telegraph, hoping a live display of its power would convince the doubters and unlock the funding he so desperately needed. But these early demonstrations were often catastrophic failures. One of the most infamous examples was his attempt to lay an insulated telegraph cable underwater across New York Harbor in 1842. He spent weeks painstakingly preparing the cable, insulating it with tar, pitch, and rubber. On the day of the demonstration, a small crowd gathered, a mix of curious onlookers and influential figures. Morse began sending his message. For a brief, tantalizing moment, it worked. Signals were being received on the other side. But then, disaster struck. A ship, unaware of the delicate cable lying on the harbor floor, dropped its anchor and dragged it up, severing the line completely. The demonstration was an abrupt and humiliating failure. The crowd dispersed, their skepticism reinforced. To them, it was just more proof that this whole electric telegraph thing was impractical nonsense. This failure was a devastating blow. Morse had pinned all his hopes on that demonstration. He had borrowed money he couldn't repay to fund it, and now he was left with nothing but broken equipment and a damaged reputation. It's at moments like these that most people would have given up. And honestly, Morse came very, very close. The physical and emotional toll was immense. He was exhausted, broke, and facing a world that seemed determined to see him fail. He wrote about his deep despair, questioning whether he had wasted a decade of his life on a fool's errand. Should he just admit defeat and return to painting? The thought must have been incredibly tempting. The comfort of a stable life versus the relentless struggle for an impossible dream. Yet, somehow, Morse found the strength to carry on. What kept him going? It was an unshakable, almost fanatical belief in his invention. He knew, with absolute certainty, that he was right. He saw the future. A future where his dots and dashes connected cities, countries, and continents. This conviction was his shield against the ridicule, and his fuel during the darkest days of poverty. He also had a small, but loyal, group of partners and supporters who believed in him. Figures like Leonard Gale and Alfred Vail provided crucial technical expertise and a much-needed morale boost. Their faith in the project helped Morse weather the storm. When he felt like quitting, they were there to remind him of what they were trying to achieve. Instead of being defeated by the failed demonstrations, Morse treated them as painful learning experiences. The New York Harbor disaster taught him about the vulnerabilities of his cables and the need for better protection. Each failure, each broken wire, each technical glitch provided valuable data. He would retreat to his workshop, analyze what went wrong, and meticulously work to improve his design. He was not just an inventor. He was becoming a relentless problem solver. This period of intense struggle, as agonizing as it was, forged both the man and the machine. It forced Morse to refine his apparatus, to make it more robust, more reliable, and more practical. The telegraph that would eventually succeed was not the one he started with. It was a battle-hardened version that had survived years of trial by fire. Finally, after years of lobbying, petitioning, and facing rejection, Morse decided to take his fight to the highest level, the United States Congress. He sought a federal grant of $30,000 to build an experimental telegraph line from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore. This was his last, desperate gamble. If he failed here, it was truly over. The process was a grueling political battle. Many congressmen openly mocked the proposal on the floor of the House. One famously suggested that if they were going to spend money on such a project, perhaps they should fund a machine to study mesmerism or other pseudoscientific fads. The bill was ridiculed and delayed. Morse spent months in Washington, walking the halls of the Capitol, pleading his case to anyone who would listen. The vote was agonizingly close. It passed the House by a razor-thin margin. Then it moved to the Senate. On the final night of the congressional session in March 1843, Morse sat in the Senate gallery, watching the clock tick towards midnight. His bill was far down the agenda, and it looked like it wouldn't even be heard. Dejected, he left the Capitol, convinced he had failed. He returned to his hotel room, completely broke and ready to give up for good. But the next morning, he was awakened by Annie Ellsworth, the daughter of a friend and the Commissioner of Patents. She rushed in with incredible news. In the final, chaotic moments of the session, just before midnight, the Senate had passed his bill. Morse was in disbelief. After a decade of relentless struggle, his moment had finally arrived. The government had given him the chance to prove his invention to the world. This chapter of Morse's life is a powerful lesson in resilience. It's a reminder that great innovations are rarely born from a single flash of genius. They are forged in the fires of adversity, doubt, and failure. Morse's story isn't just about the invention of the telegraph. It's about the incredible power of human perseverance against seemingly insurmountable odds. His struggle shows us that sometimes the most important part of chasing a dream is simply refusing to let it die, even when you're hungry, broke, and the entire world is telling you to give up. Thank you so much for joining me for this part of our story. The journey is far from over. In our next chapter, LLC Morse and his team race against time to build that historic line from Washington to Baltimore, leading to the legendary first message. What hath God wrought? It's a moment you won't want to miss. If you're enjoying the series, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you don't miss the next episode. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Welcome back to our series on the pioneers of technology. Today, we're diving into Chapter 10, Skepticism and Struggle, a dark and pivotal period in the life of Samuel Morse and his revolutionary invention, the telegraph. We often see inventors as heroic figures whose genius is instantly recognized. But Morse's story is a powerful reminder that the path to innovation is rarely smooth. It's a journey filled with doubt, failure, and the constant threat of giving up. Imagine this. You've spent years of your life, poured every ounce of your energy, and invested all your money into an idea you believe will change the world. You've finally built a working prototype. You're ready to show it to the world. But instead of applause and support, you're met with a wall of skepticism. This was Samuel Morse's reality in the late 1830s. After his initial breakthrough in 1837, Morse was filled with optimism. He had a machine that could send messages over a wire using a system of dots and dashes. It seemed miraculous. He gathered his partners, Leonard Gale and Alfred Vail, and began a campaign to convince the world, and most importantly, the United States Congress, of the telegraph's potential. His goal was ambitious: to secure government funding to build a long-distance, experimental line. This wasn't just about money. It was about getting the official stamp of approval that would legitimize his invention in the eyes of a skeptical public. His first major demonstrations were met with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. He would set up his crude apparatus in university halls and hotel rooms, inviting politicians, businessmen, and journalists to witness the magic. A message would be tapped out on one end of a wire spool, and almost instantly, the receiving instrument at the other end would begin to click and mark a paper tape. For those who saw it, it was astonishing. Reports from the time describe a sense of wonder, with spectators marveling at the lightning that could carry intelligence. But wonder didn't easily translate into faith or financial backing. The public, for the most part, viewed the telegraph as a clever trick, a piece of scientific novelty, or a philosophical toy. How could a message possibly travel miles in an instant? It sounded like something out of a fantasy novel. Newspapers were cautious, and many openly mocked the idea. They called it Morse's folly. The very concept was so far beyond the lived experience of the time that most people simply could ungrasp its practical application. It was an era of horse-drawn carriages and handwritten letters delivered by postwriters. The idea of instantaneous communication was just too radical. This public skepticism created a vicious cycle. Without widespread belief in the telegraph's utility, private investors were unwilling to risk their capital. And without private investment, Morse couldn't improve his technology or build the impressive, large-scale demonstration needed to win over the public. He was trapped. His only real hope lay with the U.S. Congress. In 1838, he traveled to Washington, D.C. His hopes high. He set up a demonstration right in the Capitol building, stringing 10 miles of wire around the committee room. He successfully transmitted messages, dazzling many of the congressmen who witnessed it. The House Committee on Commerce, led by Congressman Francis O.G. Smith, was impressed enough to draft a bill recommending a $30,000 appropriation to build a 50-mile experimental line. That's about $1 million in today's money. It seemed like the breakthrough Morse had been praying for. But Washington is a complex beast. The bill went to the full House of Representatives, where it was met with a storm of ridicule. Congressmen, who were supposed to be forward-thinking leaders, openly mocked the proposal. One suggested the money would be better spent on a study of mesmerism, a popular pseudoscience of the time. Another sarcastically proposed an amendment to fund a railroad to the moon. The bill was laughed out of the chamber, failing to even come to a vote. It was a humiliating and devastating blow for Morse. He had come so close, only to be turned into a national punchline. This public failure was compounded by intense personal hardship. Morse was not a wealthy man. He was, by trade, a portrait painter, and a very talented one at that. But to pursue his invention, he had all but abandoned his art career. The telegraph consumed him, and as a result, his income dried up. He sank into a deep and desperate poverty. There are heartbreaking letters from this period where Morse describes his struggle. In one famous letter to his friend Alfred Vail, he wrote about his dire financial state, confessing that for a week he had no money to buy food. He was literally starving for his dream. He lived in a small, cold room in New York, trying to refine his equipment while his stomach growled. His clothes grew shabby, and the once celebrated artist became a gaunt figure, haunted by his vision. His partners, Gale and Vail, also faced financial ruin, unable to provide much support. The dream of the telegraph was on the verge of dying, not from a technical flaw, but from simple, grinding poverty. Adding to his woes were the internal conflicts within his small team and the looming threat of rival inventors. In Europe, other scientists like Cook and Wheatstone in England were developing their own telegraph systems. Morse knew he was in a race, and every delay, every setback, gave his competitors an advantage. The pressure was immense. He had to keep fighting, but he was running on empty. He decided to take his invention to Europe, hoping for a warmer reception. In 1838, he sailed for England, then France, and Russia. But he found only more frustration. In England, his patent application was denied because Cook and Wheatstone's system was already established. In France, he received an award for his invention, but no financial contract. In Russia, the Tsar showed interest, but ultimately decided the project was too expensive. He returned to America in 1839, empty-handed and more discouraged than ever. The next few years were the lowest point in Morse's life. He was nearly 50 years old, broke, and a public laughingstock. The grand dream that had consumed a decade of his life seemed to be nothing more than a fool-less errand. He was forced to return to painting, and even took up teaching art at New York University to make ends meet. For a time, it seemed he had given up. The telegraph apparatus was packed away, gathering dust. The dream was in a coma. He later described this period as his valley of the shadow of death. The skepticism of the public, the ridicule of Congress, the crushing poverty, and the failures abroad had worn him down. Anyone else would have abandoned the project, written it off as a noble but failed experiment, and returned to a normal life. But something inside Morse refused to let go. Deep down, beneath the despair, the belief in his creation still flickered. He knew he had something that could connect humanity in a way never before imagined. It's in these moments of profound struggle that true character is revealed. Morse was pushed to the absolute brink, to the point of starvation and humiliation. His dream was on life support, with almost no one in the world believing in it except for him and a few loyal partners. The world had told him no, repeatedly and forcefully. But the story, as we know, doesn't end here. This period of intense skepticism and struggle was not the end of the telegraph. It was the crucible that forged the determination needed for its eventual triumph. It set the stage for one of the most dramatic comebacks in the history of invention. Join us next time for Chapter 11, as we witness the final, desperate attempt by Morse to win over Congress and the dramatic 11th-hour miracle that finally brought the telegraph to life and changed the world forever. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of this incredible story.
Welcome back to our series on the history of communication. Today, we're diving into Chapter 11, The Congressional Gamble. It's a story of perseverance, a last-ditch effort, and a decision that would forever change the world. We're talking about how Samuel Morse, the man behind the telegraph, faced his biggest hurdle yet, convincing the United States Congress to bet on his seemingly crazy invention. So, let's set the scene. It's the early 1840s. Morse has spent years perfecting his telegraph, a device that could send messages across vast distances in mere moments. He had poured his heart, soul, and what little money he had into this project. He had successfully demonstrated it over short distances, but to truly prove its worth, he needed something bigger, a real-world test that would capture the nation's imagination. His dream was a 40-mile line stretching from the nation's capital, Washington, D.C., to the bustling port city of Baltimore. This wasn't just a technical challenge, it was a financial one. An undertaking of this scale required significant funding, far more than a struggling artist and inventor could ever afford on his own. His only hope lay with Congress. He needed them to appropriate the funds, to see the same future he did. But this was no easy task. Imagine walking into the halls of power and trying to explain a concept as revolutionary as instantaneous communication. To many lawmakers, it sounded like science fiction, a fanciful dream with no practical application. They were used to dealing with roads, canals, and military spending tangible things, a network of wires carrying invisible messages. It was a tough sell, to say the least. Morse had already tried and failed. A previous attempt to secure funding had stalled, leaving him disheartened and nearly broke. He had faced ridicule and skepticism. Some congressmen openly mocked the idea, suggesting the money would be better spent on mesmerism or other pseudo-scientific pursuits of the era. The political climate was difficult, and the government was cautious about spending public money on such a speculative venture. It seemed like the telegraph, this groundbreaking invention, was destined to become a forgotten footnote in history. But Morse was not a man who gave up. With his patents secured and his belief in the telegraph unwavering, he returned to Washington in 1842 for one final push. He knew this was his last chance. He set up his telegraph apparatus in the Capitol building itself, in a room right off the Senate chamber. Day after day, he and his assistant, Alfred Vail, would be there, ready to demonstrate the machine to anyone who would listen. They would tap out messages, sending them from one end of the room to the other, showing senators and representatives the magic of dots and dashes, turning into words. This personal, hands-on approach was crucial. It transformed the telegraph from an abstract concept into a tangible reality. Lawmakers could see it work with their own eyes. They could send a message themselves and watch it appear almost instantly on the other side of the room. This was far more powerful than any written proposal or speech. Morse was a patient and passionate evangelist for his cause. He answered every question, addressed every doubt, and explained the immense potential for commerce, for news reporting, and for national defense. He wasn't just selling a machine. He was selling a vision of a connected future. His most ardent supporter in Congress was a representative from Maine named Francis Ormond Jonathan Smith, who had previously been a business partner of Morse. Smith was a savvy politician who understood how to navigate the complex corridors of power in Washington. He worked tirelessly behind the scenes, lobbying his colleagues, building a coalition of support, and framing the telegraph not as an expense, but as a strategic investment in the nation's future. He helped Morse draft the bill, carefully wording it to appeal to a broad range of interests. The bill proposed an appropriation of $30,000 for testing the capacity and usefulness of the system of electromagnetic telegraphs. That's about $1 million in today's money. It was a significant sum, and the debate in the House of Representatives was fierce. Opponents rose to speak, dismissing the project as a philosophical toy. One congressman sarcastically proposed an amendment to use part of the funds for an experiment on mesmerism. Another suggested a line to the moon. The chamber erupted in laughter, and for a moment, it seemed like Morse's dream would be laughed right out of Congress. But Morse's supporters held firm. They argued that great nations invest in innovation. They spoke of the military advantages, the ability to coordinate troops and gather intelligence instantly. They highlighted the commercial benefits, how it would revolutionize business and finance. They painted a picture of a nation bound together, not just by roads and rails, but by threads of information, making the vast country feel smaller and more unified. The demonstration in the Capitol had planted a seed of curiosity and belief, and now it was beginning to sprout. The bill narrowly passed the House of Representatives, but the fight wasn't over. It still had to get through the Senate, and the legislative session was drawing to a close. Time was running out. The bill was placed on the calendar, but it was buried under a mountain of other legislation. The final day of the session arrived, March 3rd, 1843. Morse sat in the Senate gallery, watching anxiously as the clock ticked towards midnight, the moment the session would officially end. One by one, bills were debated and voted on. But his bill, number 117, was still far down the list. As the hours dragged on, his hope began to fade. Senators were tired, eager to go home. It seemed impossible that they would get to his bill in time. Just before midnight, a friend and senator, disheartened, came to him and said there was no hope. Crushed, Morse left the Capitol, convinced he had failed. He returned to his boarding house with just 37 cents in his pocket, ready to give up and return to New York the next morning, his dream in ruins. But then, a miracle happened. The next morning, as he came down for breakfast, he was greeted by Annie Ellsworth, the young daughter of his friend Henry Ellsworth, the commissioner of patents. She rushed towards him, beaming, and exclaimed, "Professor, I have come to congratulate you." Morse, confused, asked what she meant. "On the passage of your bill," she said. He couldn't believe it. He told her it was impossible, that he had stayed until the final moments and it hadn't passed. But she insisted. Her father had stayed until the very end, in the chaotic final minutes of the session after Morse had already left. The Senate had rushed through the remaining legislation. His bill was called up and, with no time for debate, it was passed without opposition. The $30,000 appropriation was approved. Morse was overwhelmed with emotion. He was so grateful to Annie for being the first to bring him the incredible news that he promised her that she and she alone would get to choose the very first official message ever sent on the completed line. And that is the incredible story of the congressional gamble. It was a victory won, not just by technology, but by sheer human will, strategic lobbying, and a little bit of last-minute legislative luck. Morse's persistence in the face of ridicule and failure had finally paid off. Congress had taken a chance, betting on a future they could barely imagine. The stage was now set to build the 40-mile line from Washington to Baltimore, a project that would prove the telegraph's power to the world and launch a new age of information. What was that first message? We'll find out in our next chapter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this piece of history, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next part of our story. See you next time.
Today, in Chapter 12, we be getting our hands dirty and exploring one of the greatest construction projects of the 19th century, laying the first telegraph wires across the land. It wasn't just about tapping out messages. It was a grueling, back-breaking battle against nature and the very landscape itself. Imagine, for a moment, you're tasked with stringing a thin metal wire from one city to another, hundreds, even thousands of miles away. But there are no highways, no heavy machinery, and no GPS. All you have are your hands, basic tools, and an unwavering belief in a wild new idea. This was the reality for the first-line crews. Their journey was an epic saga of human grit. Let's start with the forests. America, in the mid-1800s, was covered in vast, dense, old-growth forests. The first job was to clear a path. Teams of axemen went ahead, swinging from dawn till dusk, felling ancient trees one by one. The air would have been thick with the scent of pine and the constant thud of axes against wood. It was slow, dangerous work. A falling tree, or a widowmaker, as they called dead branches, could end a life in an instant. They had to clear a wide enough swath not just for the line itself, but to prevent falling trees from taking it down in the future. Think about the sheer manpower this required. Hundreds of men, living in makeshift camps, pushing relentlessly forward, clearing a path for progress, foot by foot. Once a path was cleared, the next challenge was setting the poles. These weren't the perfectly uniform, treated poles we see today. They were often just straight, tall trees, stripped of their branches right where they were felled. Workers would dig post holes by hand, using nothing but shovels and augers. This was exhausting, repetitive labor. After digging the hole, they had to hoist these massive, heavy timbers into place, using ropes, mules, and sheer muscle. Imagine a team of men, caked in mud and sweat, coordinating their pulls, grunting and straining to raise a single pole. And they had to do this over and over, planting roughly 30 poles for every single mile of wire. It was a monumental task of physical endurance. Then came the rivers. A river was a formidable barrier. For smaller streams, they might be able to string the wire from a tall tree on one bank to another on the opposite side. But for major rivers like the Mississippi or the Ohio, this was impossible. The solution was often a gutta-percha cable. Gutta-percha was a natural latex, a rubber-like substance from a Southeast Asian tree that could insulate the wire underwater. Crews would load massive, heavy spools of this precious insulated cable onto barges. They would then slowly unspool it, letting it sink to the riverbed. This was a high-stakes operation. If the cable snagged on a rock or a submerged log, it could snap, wasting months of work and a fortune in materials. Storms could whip up unexpectedly, threatening to capsize the boat and its entire precious cargo. Successfully laying a river crossing was a major victory, a moment of collective relief for the exhausted crew. And what about mountains? Crossing a mountain range like the Appalachians was a whole different kind of nightmare. There were no roads, just treacherous game trails. All the equipment, heavy spools of wire, the insulators. The tools had to be hauled up steep, rocky inclines by mules and men. The animals would slip and struggle, and the men would have to secure every inch of progress. They worked in blistering summer heat and freezing winter snow. Avalanches and rock slides were a constant threat. In these remote, rugged areas, they were completely isolated. If someone was injured, help was days, if not weeks, away. These crews were pioneers in the truest sense, pushing into wild, untamed territory where few had ever gone before, all to connect the world with a single strand of copper. Even the seemingly civilized spaces, the cities, presented their own unique set of problems. You couldn't just string a wire wherever you wanted. You had to negotiate for rights of way. This meant dealing with property owners, city councils, and competing business interests. Some people were excited by the telegraph and welcomed it. Others saw it as an eyesore, a nuisance, or even a dangerous new technology. They worried the poles would fall or that the wires would attract lightning. Linemen had to climb onto rooftops, navigating a maze of chimneys and slanted shingles to secure the wires. The city was a jungle of a different sorta. Jungle of regulations, permissions, and public opinion. Every building they attached a wire to required a conversation, a negotiation, a signature. It was a logistical and social puzzle on top of the physical labor. Through all this, the linemen persevered. They were a rough-and-tumble group, a diverse collection of immigrants, farmhands, and adventurers drawn to the promise of steady pay and a grand purpose. They faced disease, accidents, animal attacks, and the sheer loneliness of being far from home. Their work was the invisible foundation upon which the entire telegraph network was built. Every time a message flashed across the country, it was traveling a path forged by their sweat, their struggle, and sometimes their sacrifice. They were the unsung heroes who physically stitched the nation together, one pole, one wire at a time. The challenges they overcame were immense, a testament to human ingenuity and a relentless drive to connect. Their story is a crucial and often overlooked part of how our modern, interconnected world came to be. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey into the past. The story of the telegraph is filled with these incredible feats of engineering and human spirit. If you enjoyed this deep dive, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories from the history of communication. We've got plenty more to explore. See you in the next one. Welcome, bike history lovers. Today, we're re-stepping back in time to a single day that would forever alter the course of human communication. A day when the world suddenly became a much smaller place. Grab your seats, because we're diving into the incredible story of May 24th, 1844. Imagine a world without instant messages, without phone calls, without even a reliable way to send news across the country quickly. This was the reality in the early 1840s. Information traveled at the speed of a horse or a train. A message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, a mere 40 miles away, could take hours, sometimes even a full day, to arrive. It was a world of frustrating delays and agonizing waits. But one man, a former portrait painter-turned-inventor named Samuel F.B. Morse, was about to shatter that reality. For over a decade, Morse had been on a relentless quest. He had poured his heart, soul, and what little money he had into a radical idea: sending messages through electrical wires. He faced skepticism, ridicule, and countless technical failures. People called his invention a toy, a gimmick, a scientific fantasy. He nearly starved, went into debt, and was often on the brink of giving up. But Morse possessed a stubborn belief in his vision, a vision of a world connected by lightning-fast communication. After years of lobbying and demonstrating his device, he finally secured a modest $30,000 grant from the U.S. Congress to build an experimental telegraph line. The line would stretch from the Supreme Court chamber in the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C., all the way to the Pratt Street Depot in Baltimore, Maryland. This was his one shot to prove to the world that his talking wire was not just a dream. The construction of the line was an ordeal in itself. The initial plan to bury the wires underground failed spectacularly. Precious time and money were wasted. With the deadline looming, Morse and his team made a frantic, last-ditch decision to string the wires overhead on poles. It was a rustic, unproven solution, but it was their only hope. As the spring of 1844 approached, the line was finally complete. The stage was set for a demonstration that would either make or break Samuel Morse and his electric telegraph. And so we arrive at that fateful morning, May 24th, 1844. The atmosphere in the Supreme Court chamber was thick with a mixture of anticipation and doubt. A small, curious crowd of dignitaries, politicians, and reporters had gathered. Morse, now in his 50s, sat poised before his simple yet ingenious apparatus. It was a wooden contraption with a key-like lever. His partner, Alfred Vail, was stationed at the other end of the line in Baltimore, waiting for the signal that would make history. The moment had come. The culmination of 12 long years of struggle was about to be put to the ultimate test. But what message should he send? What words would be worthy of this monumental occasion? Morse didn't choose a message of commercial or political significance. He didn't boast about his invention's power. Instead, his thoughts turned to a higher power, to the long and arduous journey that had brought him to this point. Annie Ellsworth, the young daughter of his friend and the U.S. Patent Commissioner, had suggested the phrase. It was a verse from the Bible, from the book of Numbers, chapter 23, verse 23. A phrase that perfectly captured the awe and wonder of the moment. With a steady hand, Morse began to tap out the message on his telegraph key. Click, clack, click. Each tap sent a pulse of electricity racing down the 40 miles of iron wire. In the hushed room, the only sound was the rhythmic clicking of the device, translating letters into a series of dots and dashes, the revolutionary code that bore his name. In Baltimore, Alfred Vail watched as his own machine began to tick, transcribing the electrical pulses back into letters. The message came through, clear and undeniable. A few moments passed, which must have felt like an eternity for Morse. Then, the telegraph in Washington began to chatter back to life. It was Vail, telegraphing the exact same message back, to confirm it had been received perfectly. The message was, "What hath God wrought? What hath God wrought?" The question hung in the air, resonating far beyond the walls of the Supreme Court. In that instant, the world changed. Time and space had been compressed in a way no one had ever imagined possible. A message had traveled 40 miles in a matter of seconds, not hours. The crowd erupted. The skeptics were silenced. The talking wire was real. News of the successful demonstration spread like wildfire, though ironically, it still had to travel by old, slow methods at first. But soon, the implications began to sink in. Railroads could coordinate train schedules, preventing collisions. Newspapers could receive breaking news from distant cities within minutes, transforming journalism forever. Businesses could conduct transactions across vast distances instantly. Families could share news of births and deaths without waiting weeks for a letter. The telegraph wasn't just a new gadget. It was the birth of the information age. It laid the groundwork for every form of telecommunication that would follow the telephone. The radio, television, and eventually, the internet you're using to watch this video right now. Think about it. Every time you send a text, make a video call, or refresh your social media feed, you are living in the world that Samuel Morse helped create on that spring day in 1844. His simple, forward message, tapped out in a quiet chamber, was the first beat of a drum that would become the thunderous roar of our modern, interconnected world. It was a testament to human ingenuity, perseverance against all odds, and a humble acknowledgement of a power greater than oneself. The story of May 24th, 1844, isn't just about an invention. It's a powerful reminder that the greatest changes often begin with a single idea, a single person, and a single history-making moment. What hath God wrought? Indeed. A question that heralded the dawn of a new era for all of humanity. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as we do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Let us know in the comments what other historical events you'd like to see us cover. Until next time, stay curious. May 24th, 1844. A day that would forever change the course of human history. In the stately chamber of the United States Supreme Court in Washington, D.C., A man named Samuel Morse sat before a peculiar-looking device. It was a contraption of wires, magnets, and a small key. The air was thick with anticipation. A crowd of dignitaries, scientists, and skeptics had gathered, their eyes fixed on Morse and his invention, the telegraph. 40 miles away, in Baltimore, his associate Alfred Vail waited by a duplicate machine. The stage was set for a moment that would either be a spectacular failure or a groundbreaking triumph. Morse, with a steady hand, began to tap the key. Click, click, click. Each tap sent a pulse of electricity racing down the iron wire that stretched between the two cities. In Baltimore, Vail watched as his machine began to print a series of dots and dashes onto a strip of paper. He deciphered the coded message, a quote chosen by a young woman named Annie Ellsworth. "What hath God wrought?" The message was a testament to the wonder and almost divine power of this new technology. Vail, filled with excitement, immediately tapped the same message back to Washington. When Morse announced to the stunned audience that he had just received the same message back from Baltimore, the room erupted. Disbelief quickly turned to awe. The message had traveled 40 miles and back in a matter of minutes. Before this day, the fastest communication was the speed of a horse or a train. News, ideas, and personal messages took days, weeks, or even months to cross distances. Now, they could travel at the speed of electricity. The tyranny of distance was beginning to crumble. The news of Morse's successful demonstration spread like wildfire, though ironically, it still traveled at the old, slower pace. Newspapers across the country hailed the invention. Editorials struggled to find words to describe the magnitude of what had just happened. They caid, eat the annihilation of space and time. They spoke of a future where continents would be connected, where business transactions could happen in an instant, and where families separated by vast distances could feel a little closer. For the first time, humanity could communicate almost instantaneously over long distances. It was a concept so revolutionary, so profoundly different from anything that had come before, that many people simply couldn't grasp it. Initial public reaction was a mixture of wonder and skepticism. Some dismissed it as a clever trick, a parlor game for the elite. How could a simple series of clicks and wires possibly carry a message over such a distance? It seemed like magic, or perhaps even something more sinister. There were whispers of sorcery, of tampering with forces that humanity was not meant to understand. But as more and more telegraph lines were built, and as the reality of the technology became undeniable, skepticism gave way to a powerful sense of wonder. Imagine living in a world where the fastest you've ever known news to travel is by a rider on horseback. Then, one day, you learned that a message can be sent from Washington to Baltimore faster than you can walk across a room. It would be like us learning today that we could teleport. The psychological impact was immense. The world suddenly felt smaller, more connected. The future, which had always seemed a distant and foggy concept, now felt immediate and filled with electrifying possibility. The telegraph didn't just change how people sent messages. It changed how they thought about the world. Businesses were among the first to see the potential. Stock markets, which had previously relied on slow-moving mail, could now get real-time price updates. Railroads used the telegraph to coordinate train schedules, making travel safer and more efficient. A dispatcher could now warn a train of a blockage on the track miles ahead, preventing countless disasters. This new level of coordination was revolutionary. Journalism was also transformed. Before the telegraph, a newspaper in New York might report on an event in New Orleans a week after it happened. With the telegraph, reporters could send their stories back to their editors almost as they were happening. This gave birth to the modern news cycle, the idea of breaking news, and organizations like the Associated Press, which was formed by a group of newspapers to share the cost of telegraphing news. The public developed a new appetite for timely information. They wanted to know what was happening. Asterisk, now asterisk, not last week. And what about the personal impact? Suddenly, a son working in a city far from home could send a message to his parents, letting them know he arrived safely. A family could be notified of a birth or a death within hours, not weeks. These weren't just abstract bits of information. They were powerful emotional connections, woven together by copper wires and electric pulses. The telegraph brought a new immediacy to human relationships. closing the emotional gap that physical distance created. Of course, with this new power came new challenges. The language of the telegraph was concise, almost brutal in its brevity. Telegrams were priced by the word, so people learned to be economical with their language. This led to a new form of writing, terse, direct, and stripped of all pleasantries. The famous phrase "stop" was used to indicate the end of a sentence, a purely functional marker in this new, utilitarian form of communication. It was a far cry from the flowery, detailed letters of the era. Some worried that this would lead to a decline in the art of writing, that we would lose our ability to express ourselves with nuance and grace. There were also concerns about privacy. A telegraph message was not a sealed letter. It was read by the operator who sent it and the operator who received it. There was an inherent vulnerability in this system. Secrets, business deals, and personal confessions were all entrusted to a chain of strangers. The idea of information security, something we take for granted today, was born in these early days of electronic communication. But despite these concerns, the overwhelming feeling was one of optimism. The telegraph was seen as a great unifier, a tool that would bring nations closer together, foster understanding, and even promote peace. Many believed that if people could communicate more easily, they would understand each other better, and conflicts would become a thing of the past. It was a utopian vision, one that saw technology as the key to solving humanity's oldest problems. While that dream may have been naive, it speaks to the incredible hope that this invention inspired. Within a few short decades, a web of telegraph wires crisscrossed the globe. In 1858, the first transatlantic cable was laid, connecting North America and Europe. Queen Victoria sent a message to President James Buchanan, a message that took nearly 17 hours to transmit, but was still a monumental achievement. Though that first cable failed shortly after, the dream had been proven possible. By 1866, a permanent, reliable connection was established. A message could now cross the Atlantic in minutes. The world that Samuel Morse and his contemporaries knew was gone forever. They had opened a door that could never be closed. The telegraph was the first step in a long line of communication technologies. The telephone, the radio, television, and eventually, the internet. Each of these inventions built upon the fundamental principle demonstrated on that fateful day in 1844. That human thought could be converted into an electrical signal and sent across vast distances at the speed of light. What hath God wrought? The question, tapped out in dots and dashes, echoed far beyond that quiet room in the Supreme Court. It became the anthem of a new age, a recognition that humanity had tapped into a fundamental force of the universe and harnessed it for its own purpose. It was a moment of profound humility and breathtaking ambition. The world had heard the message, and it would never be the same again. We are all living in the world that this first message helped create, a world connected by invisible threads of information, a global conversation that started with a simple click. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, please hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the moments that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what invention do you think most changed human communication. Until next time, stay curious. Imagine a world where sending a message from New York to San Francisco took months. Months of waiting, wondering if your letter even arrived. Then, suddenly, a new invention changes everything. In the blink of an eye, or rather, the click of a key, that same message could cross the entire continent in minutes. This wasn't science fiction. This was the reality of the 19th century, and it was called the telegraph. Welcome back to our series, where today we're diving into Chapter 15. Telegraph fever sweeps the nation. In the mid-1800s, America was a vast and sprawling country. Communication was slow, limited by the speed of a horse, a train, or a ship. But Samuel Morse's invention of the telegraph was about to shrink the nation in a way no one could have imagined. After his famous 1844 demonstration, where he sent a message, "What hath God wrought?" from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore, the race was on. It was like the dot-com bubble of the 19th century. Everyone wanted a piece of the action. Ambitious entrepreneurs and gritty pioneers saw the future in those thin copper wires. They started stringing lines, pole by pole, across prairies, over mountains, and through dense forests. It was a monumental task. Workers faced treacherous weather, difficult terrain, and the sheer, back-breaking labor of planting thousands upon thousands of wooden poles. But the promise of connecting the nation and the potential for immense profit fueled an incredible wave of construction. Almost overnight, telegraph fever gripped America. Small towns and booming cities alike clamored to be connected to the growing network. Being on the telegraph line meant being part of the modern world. It was a status symbol, a sign of progress and prosperity. It was like getting fiber optic internet for the first time. Suddenly, you were no longer isolated. You were part of a national conversation happening in real time. The impact on business was revolutionary. Before the telegraph, merchants would send orders by mail. And by the time the goods arrived weeks or months later, market prices could have completely changed. It was a huge gamble. The telegraph eliminated that uncertainty. A stockbroker in New York could get the latest prices from London in hours, not weeks. A cotton merchant in New Orleans could instantly know the demand in textile mills up in New England. This new speed of information created a more unified, national market. Businesses could operate with a level of efficiency and foresight that was previously impossible. Fortunes were made and lost in the space of a single coded message. Journalism was perhaps one of the most dramatically transformed fields. Newspapers went from publishing old news, sometimes weeks late, to reporting events as they happened. The Associated Press was formed in 1846 by a group of New York newspapers, specifically to pool resources and share the cost of telegraphic news from the Mexican-American War. For the first time, a reader in Boston could wake up and read about a battle that took place the previous day thousands of miles away. This created a shared national experience. People across the country were reading the same news at the same time, fostering a stronger sense of national identity. Reporters became a new kind of hero, racing to the nearest telegraph office to be the first to get the scoop. And then there was politics. The telegraph changed the very nature of political campaigns and governance. Abraham Lincoln was a master of this new technology. During the Civil War, he spent countless hours in the War Department's telegraph office, right next to the operator. He used it to communicate directly with his generals on the battlefield, receiving real-time updates and issuing immediate orders. It was an unprecedented level of command and control. He could manage the war effort from Washington in a way no previous president could have dreamed of. The telegraph became an essential tool of the Union's victory, a true weapon of war that transmitted commands instead of cannonballs. The expansion was relentless. The ultimate prize was connecting the East Coast to the burgeoning West Coast. The challenge was immense, crossing the Rocky Mountains and the vast, empty plains. In 1861, the first transcontinental telegraph was completed, linking the network from the Atlantic to the Pacific. This single line of wire made the famous Pony Express, which had only been in operation for about 18 months, instantly obsolete. A message that once took 10 days by horse could now be sent in minutes. The iron horse of the railroad would soon follow the path blazed by the lightning lines of the telegraph. The telegraph didn't just carry business transactions or news headlines. It carried personal messages of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. Families separated by thousands of miles could share news of a birth or a death almost instantly. A son who went west to seek his fortune could wire money back home to his parents. It wove the personal stories of millions of Americans into a single, national fabric. The staccato clicks of the telegraph key became the heartbeat of a connected nation. Of course, this new technology also had its own language, Morse code. An entire generation of young men, and some women, became telegraph operators. It was a skilled high-tech job for its time. They were the original coders, translating thoughts and words into a series of dots and dashes. These operators formed a unique fraternity, a community connected by the wires they managed. They had their own slang, their own culture, and they were the crucial human element in this new technological network. They were the wizards behind the curtain, making the magic of instant communication possible. By the end of the 19th century, a web of telegraph wires crisscrossed the entire United States, and submarine cables were even stretching across the oceans, connecting continents. The world had become a smaller, faster, and more interconnected place. This telegraph fever didn't just build a network of wires. It laid the very foundation for our modern, information-driven world. From the telephone to the internet, every communication technology that followed owes a debt to those first clicks and the feverish ambition that strung a wire across a continent. It truly was the Victorian internet, and it forever changed America. What do you think was the most important impact of the telegraph? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching, and if you enjoyed this journey back in time, be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you and miss our next chapter. See you next time. Hello everyone, and welcome back to our series on the history of communication. Today, we're diving into a story of incredible ambition, monumental failure, and ultimate triumph. This is Chapter 16. Lincoln Continents. We've seen how the telegraph conquered land, but the next frontier was far more daunting. The vast, unforgiving ocean. Imagine the world in the mid-19th century. Sending a message from London to New York took at least 10 days by the fastest steamship. Business deals, political negotiations, even personal news, all moved at the speed of the sea. But a few bold visionaries started asking a radical question. What if we could lay a wire across the Atlantic floor? It sounded like science fiction. The ocean was miles deep, full of crushing pressure, and completely uncharted territory for this kind of engineering. The man who took up this challenge was Cyrus Westfield, an American businessman who had made his fortune and retired by his myth. He wasn't an engineer or a scientist, but he was a master of persuasion and relentless in his pursuit of this grand idea. He assembled a team of the brightest minds, including Samuel Morse himself and the brilliant physicist William Thomson, later known as Lord Kelvin. Their first attempt in 1857 was a disaster. The cable, thousands of miles long and weighing tons, snapped and was lost to the sea. The public, who had invested heavily, was furious. The media mocked it as a colossal failure, but Field was undeterred. He raised more money, chartered bigger ships, the largest naval vessels of the British and American navies, in fact, and prepared for another try. The second attempt in 1858 was even more dramatic. The ships met in the middle of the Atlantic, spliced the cable, and sailed in opposite directions, laying it as they went. They battled a hurricane of epic proportions. The cable snapped again and again. It seemed hopeless. At one point, the chief engineer declared the mission impossible, but somehow, against all odds, they managed to land the cable on both shores, in Ireland and Newfoundland. On August 16, 1858, the first ever transatlantic telegraph message was sent. Queen Victoria sent a message of congratulations to U.S. President James Buchanan. The world erupted in celebration. There were fireworks, parades, and church bells ringing across cities. It felt like humanity had just conquered the ocean itself. This single wire had shrunk the world, turning days of waiting into mere minutes. But the celebration was short-lived. The cable's signal started to fade. The chief electrician on the project, a man named Wildman Whitehouse, believed that high voltage was the key to sending a clear signal. He kept cranking up the power against the advice of Lord Kelvin, who argued for a more sensitive, low-voltage approach. In a tragic turn of events, Whitehouse's high-voltage blasts literally fried the cable. Within a month, it went silent. The dream was dead. The public felt cheated, and Cyrus Field was financially ruined and publicly humiliated. For 8 long years, the project lay dormant. The American Civil War broke out, and the world's attention turned elsewhere. Many believed that transatlantic cable was a folly that would never be repeated, but Cyrus Field never gave up. He spent those years tirelessly trying to rebuild support and raise funds for one last attempt. This time, he had a secret weapon, the SS Great Eastern. This was the largest ship in the world, a true iron giant designed by the legendary engineer Isambard Kingdom Brunel. It was the only vessel on Earth big enough to carry the entire length of the new, improved, and much stronger cable in a single voyage. In 1865, the Great Eastern set sail. Everything went smoothly for over 1,000 miles, but then disaster struck again. The cable snapped and sank to the bottom of the ocean, 2 miles down. They spent days trying to grapple for it, hooking in multiple times only to have the ropes break. They were forced to abandon it and return home, defeated once more. At this point, any sane person would have quit. Field had faced failure after failure, financial ruin, and public ridicule. But his belief in the project was unbreakable. He immediately started raising money for yet another attempt. In 1866, with a new and improved cable, The Great Eastern set sail one last time. This time, it worked. The journey was almost flawless. On July 27th, 1866, the cable was successfully landed at a small fishing village in Newfoundland, appropriately named Hearts, Content. The connection was stable, the signals were clear, and the line was officially open for business. The dream was finally a reality. But the story doesn't end there. In an incredible feat of maritime engineering and sheer persistence, the Great Eastern sailed back to the middle of the Atlantic, to the very spot where the 1865 cable had been lost. Using custom-designed grappling hooks and guided by incredibly precise navigation, they managed to find, hook, and haul up the lost cable from 2.5 miles below the surface. They spliced it onto a new section of cable, and unbelievably, it still worked. Suddenly, the world didn't just have one transatlantic cable, it had two. The impact was immediate and profound. News that once took weeks to cross the ocean now arrived in minutes. Stock prices in London and New York could be synchronized in near real time. Revolutionizing global finance, diplomats could communicate directly during crises, potentially averting wars. The assassination of Abraham Lincoln, for example, took 12 days to reach Europe. After the cable, news of similar magnitude would be known worldwide within hours. This wasn't just about connecting Europe and America. It was the beginning of a truly global network. From this success, cables began to snake their way across every ocean. A line from Britain to India was completed in 1870, routed through the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. Messages that used to take months by ship could now reach their destination in under an hour. This network bound the British Empire together like never before, allowing for centralized control and rapid military deployment. This web of wires, lying silently on the ocean floor, became the nervous system of a new global age. It accelerated the pace of business, diplomacy, and news, creating a more interconnected and interdependent world. It was a world where distance was no longer the primary barrier to communication. The telegraph had not only conquered land, but had now tamed the oceans, laying the groundwork for the globalized world we live in today. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey across the Atlantic. The story of the telegraph is a powerful reminder of how human ingenuity and perseverance can overcome even the most impossible challenges. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next chapter. See you next time. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that shapes our entire world. Yet we often take it for granted, the information age. And you might be surprised to learn that its roots didn't start with silicon chips or fiber optics, but with a simple click-clack sound that echoed across continents over 150 years ago. We're talking about the telegraph. So, picture this. It's the early 1800s. If you want to send a message from New York to London, you write a letter, hand it to someone on a ship, and wait. Weeks, maybe even months, could pass before you get a reply. Communication was at the mercy of wind, waves, and horsepower. It was a world that felt vast and disconnected. Information moved at the speed of a horse, not the speed of light. Then, in the 1830s and 40s, everything changed. Inventors like Samuel Morse weren't just creating a new gadget. They were fundamentally altering the fabric of human society. The telegraph was the first technology that allowed for instantaneous communication over long distances. Suddenly, a message could cross an entire country in minutes, not weeks. Think about that for a second. The very concept of distance began to shrink. How did it work? It was beautifully simple. An operator would tap a key, completing an electrical circuit. This sent a pulse of electricity down a wire to a receiver miles away, which would then click. The genius was in the code. Morse code, a system of dots and dashes, translated these simple electrical pulses into letters and numbers. A short click was a dot, a longer one was a dash. With this new language, humanity could speak across horizons. The impact was immediate and revolutionary. For businesses, it was a goldmine. Stock prices, commodity information, and business deals could be transmitted instantly, creating a truly global market for the first time. Railroads used it to coordinate train schedules, preventing collisions and making travel safer and more efficient. Newspapers could report on events from distant cities on the same day they happened, creating a shared sense of national and even international news. It was the birth of the 24-hour news cycle, 19 Thursday century style. But the telegraph was more than just a tool for business and logistics. It laid the very foundation, the conceptual and physical blueprint, for every communication network that followed. It was the first electronic network, a vast web of wires crisscrossing the globe. When the first transatlantic cable was successfully laid in 1866, it was a monumental achievement, like an undersea Apollo mission for its time. For the first time, continents could talk to each other in real time. Queen Victoria and the U.S. President exchanged messages, and the world celebrated. It was the birth of our global village. This network of wires became the inspiration for what came next. When Alexander Graham Bell invented the telephone, he was essentially trying to send the human voice over the same kind of electrical network the telegraph had pioneered. He wanted to make the speak-in telegraph a reality. The infrastructure was already there, waiting for the next innovation. Then came radio. Guglielmo Marconi, the father of radio, experimented with sending Morse code wirelessly. He wasn't trying to broadcast music or talk shows. His initial goal was to create a wireless telegraph. The first transatlantic wireless transmission in 1901 was not a voice, but the three simple dots of the letter S in Morse code sent from Cornwall, England, to Newfoundland, Canada. Radio literally began as a telegraph without wires, freeing communication from the physical constraints of cables. As we move into the 20th century, we see this pattern repeat. Early computers were connected using systems that were direct descendants of telegraph networks. The teletypewriter, which allowed users to type messages that were then transmitted electrically, was a bridge between the telegraph key and the modern computer keyboard. And that brings us to the internet. At its core, what is the internet? It's a global network designed to transmit information, broken down into small packets of data, from one point to another. This is the exact same fundamental principle as the telegraph, breaking down complex information, in this case, a web page or an email, into simple units, dots and dashes, or in the internet's case, ones and zeros. These digital bits are then sent through a network of wires, fiber optic cables, and wireless signals, and reassembled at their destination. The internet is, in many ways, the ultimate evolution of the telegraph. It's a network of networks, a system of unimaginable complexity. But its foundational idea is the same one that Samuel Morse tinkered with nearly 2 centuries ago, turning information into electrical signals to conquer distance and time. The social media post you just scrolled past, the video you're watching right now, the text message you were about to send all exist on a direct line of innovation that started with a simple click. So, the next time you effortlessly video chat with someone on the other side of the planet, remember the humble telegraph? It wasn't just the first step. It was the giant leap that defined the path for everything that followed. It taught us how to build a network, how to speak a digital language, and how to connect the world. The information age may feel like a modern invention, but its heartbeat began with the rhythmic pulse of the telegraph, echoing through the wires and into the future. It's the forgotten grandparent of our hyper-connected world. Thanks so much for watching. If you found this journey back in time interesting, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the history of technology. Let me know in the comments what other forgotten technologies you'd like to explore. See you in the next one.
Have you ever sent a text and gotten a reply almost instantly? Or maybe you video called a friend halfway across the world? It feels so normal, right? But what if I told you that the foundation for all of this instant communication was laid by one man and a single groundbreaking message? Today, we're diving into the final chapter of Samuel Morse's incredible life, exploring his legacy and how his invention, the telegraph, truly changed the world forever. Welcome back to our series on the Titans of Innovation. In our last episode, we saw Morse's telegraph system finally gain traction, with lines spreading across America and Europe. The world was shrinking, and information was traveling faster than ever before. But what happened to the man behind it all? How did the world repay the artist-turned-inventor who connected continents? That's the story for today. After decades of struggle, financial hardship, and relentless skepticism, Samuel Morse finally found himself on the receiving end of worldwide acclaim. The success of the telegraph wasn't just a national victory, it was a global phenomenon. Countries that had once dismissed his idea were now scrambling to build their own telegraph networks, all based on his system. Imagine the scene. In 1858, representatives from 10 different European nations, Austria, Belgium, the Netherlands, Russia, Sweden, Tuscany, and even the Ottoman Empire gathered in Paris. Their purpose? To collectively acknowledge their debt to one man, Samuel Morse. They couldn't individually award him, as his patent was an American one, but they recognized that their national communication systems were profiting immensely from his invention. So, in an unprecedented move, they pulled together a sum of 400,000 French francs, a fortune at the time, and presented it to Morse as a token of their gratitude. This wasn't just money, it was a powerful symbol. The world was officially tipping its hat to the American inventor. Honors began pouring in from all corners of the globe. He was decorated with medals and titles from nearly every civilized country. He received the Order of the Tower and Sword from Portugal, the Order of the Dannebrog from the King of Denmark, and the Cross of a Knight of the Order of Isabella, the Catholic, from the Queen of Spain. The Sultan of Turkey, Abdülmecid I, personally bestowed upon him the Order of Glory, set in diamond. It is almost comical when you think about it. The man who once had to borrow money for a meal was now being showered with jewels by royalty. But for Morse, perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from his own people. Back home in the United States, his name became synonymous with progress and ingenuity. He wasn't just an inventor, he was a national hero. In 1871, a year before his death, the telegraph community of America decided to give him a grand farewell tribute. On June 10th, a bronze statue of Morse was unveiled in New York's Central Park, a project funded by thousands of telegraph operators across the country, the very people whose livelihoods were built on his invention. That evening, a massive reception was held at the Academy of Music. The event was a testament to his impact. A special telegraph instrument was placed on the stage, connected to the entire network of telegraph lines across the United States and Canada. Think about that, it was a nationwide conference call, 80s-70s style. Cables even ran under the Atlantic, connecting to London and beyond. At the climax of the evening, the now elderly Samuel Morse, with his long white beard, was escorted to the table. His hand, once steady enough to paint masterpieces, now trembled slightly with age. With the entire continent listening in, he tapped out a final, poignant message. It wasn't "What hath God wrought" this time. Instead, he simply typed his name, S.F.B. Morse. And then, as a closing farewell to the world he had connected, he added the words, "Greetings and thanks to the telegraph fraternity throughout the world. Glory to God in the highest, on earth peace, goodwill toward men." The applause was thunderous. From San Francisco to Halifax, telegraph operators heard the clicks and relayed the message. It was a deeply emotional moment. The man who had started it all was signing off, using the very system he had birthed. The young boy who dreamed of being an artist had, in the end, painted his masterpiece not on a canvas, but across the surface of the globe with wires and electric pulses. In his later years, Morse was able to enjoy the fruits of his labor. He purchased a beautiful estate in Poughkeepsie, New York, which he named Locust Grove. Here, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, he lived a life of comfortable retirement. He became a prominent philanthropist, donating generously to educational institutions like Vassar College and Yale University, as well as 2 religious organizations and charities. He had always been a man of deep faith, and he saw his success not as his own doing, but as part of a divine plan. He had been a tool, he believed, in the hands of a higher power to bring humanity closer together. But he never truly stopped being an inventor and a forward thinker. He was fascinated by the emerging technology of photography, known then as the Daguerreotype. In fact, after meeting its inventor, Louis Daguerre, in Paris, Morse became one of the first people to bring the technology to America and teach it to others, including the famous Civil War photographer Matthew Brady. He saw the potential in everything, from a new way to capture an image to a new way to send a message. Samuel Morse passed away in New York City on April 2, 1872, at the age of 80. His death was mourned around the world. Tributes poured in over the very wires he had made possible. The world had lost a giant. So, let's reflect on his legacy. It's easy to look at the telegraph and see it as an old, outdated technology. We have smartphones, the internet, fiber optics. Tapping out dots and dashes seems ancient. But to dismiss it that way is to miss the entire point. The telegraph wasn't just about faster messages. It was a fundamental shift in the human experience. For the first time in history, distance was no longer a barrier to immediate communication. Before Morse, the fastest a message could travel was the speed of a horse or a ship. News of a battle, a political decision, or a family emergency could take weeks or months to cross an ocean. The telegraph changed that overnight. Suddenly, a stock price in London could be known in New York in minutes. A reporter on a battlefield could send updates in near real time. Families separated by continents could share news of a birth or a death without an agonizing wait. This had profound consequences. It revolutionized commerce, creating a truly global market. It transformed journalism, giving rise to wire services like the Associated Press. It changed the nature of warfare and diplomacy, as leaders could command armies and negotiate with foreign powers instantly. It even helped knit nations together. In the United States, the transcontinental telegraph line, completed in 1861, was a powerful symbol of unity, connecting the East and West coasts at a time when the nation was being torn apart by the Civil War. But perhaps the most important part of Morse's legacy is the very idea he championed, that information could be converted into a simple binary coda pulse or no pulse, a dot or a dash and transmitted over a wire. This is the foundational concept of the entire digital age. Every email you send, every photo you post, every video you stream, it's all just a complex version of Morse's dots and dashes, translated into ones and zeros. The language is different, the speed is astronomical, but the core principle is the same. Samuel Morse didn't just invent a machine. He helped invent the digital world. From the first curious message, "What hath God wrought?" a new era of human connection was born. Morse's life is a powerful story of perseverance. It's a reminder that great ideas often face great resistance, and that success rarely comes without struggle. He was an artist who became an inventor, a man of faith who saw technology as a way to unite humanity. His legacy isn't just in the dusty telegraph keys you might see in a museum. It's in the invisible network that surrounds us every day, in every text, every call, every piece of information that flies across the globe in the blink of an eye. He sent the first message, and in doing so, he opened the conversation for the rest of us. And that conversation is still going on today. Thanks so much for joining me on this journey through the life of Samuel Morse. If you enjoyed this series, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the people who shaped our world. Let me know in the comments who you'd like to see me cover next. Until then, stay curious. Welcome back to our series. Today, we delve into our final chapter, a reflection aptly titled, "What Hath Man Wrought Since?" It's a powerful question, a direct echo of Samuel Morse's very first telegraph message. What hath God wrought? That message, sent in 1844, was a mix of awe, wonder, and perhaps a bit of trepidation. It marked the dawn of instant long-distance communication, a concept that must have felt like pure magic. For Morse and his contemporaries, the idea of sending a message from Washington, D.C. to Baltimore in mere moments was revolutionary. It collapsed space and time in a way that was previously unimaginable. Think about it. Before the telegraph, the fastest a message could travel was the speed of a horse or a train. Suddenly, information could outpace human movement. This wasn't just a technological leap. It was a fundamental shift in how humanity connected, conducted business, and waged war. The world became smaller, more interconnected overnight. Now, let's fast forward to our time. What hath man wrought since? The legacy of Morse's dots and dashes is all around us, embedded in the very fabric of our daily lives. We live in an era of hyperconnectivity. The device you're watching this on right now is a direct descendant of that original spark of innovation. We don't just send text messages across cities. We send high-definition video across oceans instantly. We have live conversations with people on the other side of the planet, seeing their faces, hearing their voices, as if they were in the same room. Think about the sheer volume of information we create and share every single second. Billions of emails, texts, photos, and videos zip around the globe. Social media platforms connect us to friends, family, and strangers, creating global communities around shared interests. News, both good and bad, travels at the speed of light, not the speed of a locomotive. The intricate network of satellites, fiber optic cables, and wireless signals that makes this possible is a marvel of modern engineering, a testament to generations of innovators who stood on the shoulders of pioneers like Morse. But this constant stream of communication comes with its own complexities, doesn't it? Morse's era was about overcoming the silence, about bridging the physical distance. Our era is about navigating the noise. We are inundated with information, a constant barrage of notifications, updates, and messages. The challenge is no longer just about sending and receiving. It's about filtering, understanding, and managing this digital deluge. The quiet moments, the times for deep reflection, are harder to find. We have more ways to talk than ever before. But are we truly communicating better? Are we forming deeper connections? Or are we just creating wider, shallower networks? This isn't to say that our modern world is a downgrade. Far from it. The benefits are undeniable. Families separated by continents can share daily moments. Activists can organize global movements for social change. Scientists can collaborate in real time to solve humanity's biggest problems, from climate change to disease. During emergencies, this instant communication can be a lifeline, coordinating rescue efforts and disseminating vital information to keep people safe. The power we hold in our hands is immense, a power Morse could have only dreamed of. Yet, it's worth reflecting on the spirit of that first message. What hath God wrought? Carried a sense of humility. It acknowledged a power greater than oneself, a sense of wonder at the universe's possibilities. Perhaps the question for our time, what hath man wrought since, should also be asked with a similar sense of humility and responsibility. We have built this incredible, complex, and sometimes overwhelming world of instant communication. We are the architects of this digital age. The enduring spirit of innovation that connects Morse's time, 2 hours, is the human desire to connect, to share, to understand, and to be understood. From the simple spark of a telegraph to the global neural network of the internet, the technology has evolved, but the fundamental human need remains the same. Morse's invention wasn't just about wires and electricity, it was about bringing people closer together. And as we continue to innovate, to push the boundaries of what's possible, that should remain our guiding principle. So, as we close this journey, let's hold on to that sense of wonder. Let's appreciate the magic of being able to connect with anyone, anywhere, at any time. But let's also be mindful of how we use this incredible power. Let's strive to use it to build bridges, not walls. To foster understanding, not division. And to create a world that is not just more connected, but more compassionate. The story of communication is the story of humanity itself, and the next chapter is still unwritten. It's up to us to decide what we will write next. Thank you so much for joining me on this exploration. It's been a fascinating journey through time and technology. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the history that shapes our world. We'll see you next time.
We've reached the end of our journey. Chapter 20. The echo of the first message. It's time to gather our thoughts and reflect on the incredible story we've followed. It all began with a simple, almost anticlimactic moment to letters L and O, typed out and sent into the digital ether. Lo, it wasn't hello world or some grand proclamation. It was a fragment, an incomplete thought, a digital stutter. And yet, in its imperfection, it was perfect. It was human. Think about that for a moment. The very first message sent over the ARPANET, the precursor to our internet, was an error. The system crashed before the full word login could be transmitted. But lo was enough. It was proof of concept. It was the digital equivalent of a baby's first cry. It announced the birth of a new era of connection, one that would shrink the globe and reshape humanity in ways its creators could barely imagine. That initial message, lo, holds a kind of poetic power that still resonates today. It's a whisper that has grown into the deafening roar of our modern digital age. Every email we send, every video we stream, every meme we share are all echoes of that first, fragile transmission. They are descendants of lo. It's a reminder that monumental achievements often start with small, fumbling steps. It wasn't a perfectly executed plan. It was a trial, an error, and ultimately, a breakthrough. This origin story is so important because it demystifies technology. We often see the internet as this flawless, monolithic entity, but its foundation was built on experimentation, on a willingness to try and fail. The spirit of lo is the spirit of innovation itself. It's about the courage to send something out into the unknown, not knowing if it will arrive, not knowing what the response will be. It's the same spirit that drives a scientist to test a new hypothesis, or an artist to share a new creation with the world. And how does this echo sound in our lives today? Well, look at how we communicate. We use abbreviations, emojis, and slang that create a shorthand, a digital dialect. Our online conversations are often fragmented, rapid-fire exchanges. Not unlike that first lo, we start conversations and get interrupted. We send typos. We hit send too early. The imperfection of that first message is mirrored in the beautiful, messy, and authentically human way we interact online every single day. The story of lo is also a powerful metaphor for connection itself. Lo and behold, an archaic phrase, meaning look and see. It's a call to witness something new and surprising. And wasn't that the point of the ARPANET? To allow researchers hundreds of miles apart to look and see each other's work, to share resources, to connect their minds. That first message, by pure coincidence, was a command to pay attention. Something incredible was happening. In our hyper-connected world, it's easy to become jaded. We complain about information overload, the toxicity of social media, and the loss of genuine connection, and those are valid concerns. But perhaps, by remembering Lo, we can recapture some of the initial wonder. We can remember that at its core, this vast network is a tool for reaching out, for saying, hello, are you there? Even if all that comes out is a fragment. That first message wasn't just a technical achievement. It was an act of profound optimism. It was a belief that connecting two machines could ultimately connect to people, and then to communities, and then the entire world. It was a bet on the human desire to communicate, to share, to not be alone. And that bet paid off in ways that are still unfolding. As we scroll through our feeds, we are participating in a global conversation that started with those two letters. Every like, share, and comment is a pulse in this planetary nervous system. We are the beneficiaries of that first tentative digital handshake. The network that began in a lab at UCLA with a message that was only half sent now encompasses billions of us. It carries our hopes, our dreams, our arguments, and our cat videos. Let's think about the contrast. The message was sent between two massive, room-sized computers. Today, we hold devices in our palms that are millions of times more powerful, yet the fundamental act remains the same. Encoding a thought, sending it across a distance, and hoping it is received and understood. The technology has evolved, but the human impulse is timeless. So, what is the ultimate legacy of Lo? It's a reminder that the greatest journeys begin with a single step, even a clumsy one. It's a testament to the power of human ingenuity and our unyielding drive to connect. It's a symbol of how something broken can still be revolutionary. The system crashed, but the idea survived. The message was incomplete, but the meaning was infinite. In our digital age, where everything feels polished and curated, the story of Lo gives us permission to be imperfect. It tells us that it's okay to start small, to make mistakes, to not have all the answers. The goal is to simply begin to reach out, to send your own Lo into the world and see what happens. As we conclude this series, I want to leave you with that image. A quiet room, two engineers, and two simple letters flickering onto a screen. Lo, it wasn't a shout. It was a whisper heard around the world, an echo that continues to shape our reality. It was the beginning of everything we now know as the online world. It's a story of a beautiful, glorious, and world-changing failure. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey through the history of connection. It's been an absolute privilege to explore these stories with you. If you've enjoyed this series, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel for more deep dives into the technologies and ideas that shape our world. We've got so much more to explore together. Thanks for watching.